Looking in the wrong direction still, sorry. Good evening. I call this meeting to order at 6:19 p.m. Tonight we have President Directors Keitler, DeFreitas, Ramirez, After, and myself, meaning we have a quorum. Thank you to our interpreter Astrid. Would you please share the interpretation instructions with our participants, and then we can turn on the interpretation function. Thank you. The first business in order is the approval of the agenda. Directors, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. Motion passes. Our next agenda item is our opening celebrations and updates by our superintendent, Dr. Anna Cole.
All right, good evening. This Friday, October 25th, is one of the 2 staff workdays that we do not have students in school because we dedicate these days to parent-teacher conferences or parent-guardian conferences. So across the district, schools use that day to develop flexible schedules that would accommodate parent and guardian availability to ensure that every parent and guardian has the opportunity to meet one-to-one with their students' teachers. So this work, parent-teacher conferences for us, even though we have a day without that's not a student contact day, the conferences actually kind of happen over the last week and this week to make sure that we can connect with families. Dedicating time for these critical conversations is central to our strategies to strengthen academic achievement. You all will remember that one of our 5 strategic priorities for our new strategic plan is student-centered partnerships. And we know that partnering with partners and families is critical to student success. And what's really interesting about parent-teacher conferences is that when you look at the evidence and the research in the field of education, when we're trying to figure out what is the highest leverage strategy for parent partnerships, the research shows again and again that the most important thing you can do as a school is to facilitate the one-to-one conversations with parents, guardians, and their children's teachers that focus on student strength, growth areas, and student well-being. And in those conversations, work towards shared goals, aligned understanding, and collaborative action plans. So it can certainly be frustrating as we're trying to kind of take more off of teachers' plates. They have a lot. But this research is hard to deny. And what it really tells us is that no matter how many fantastic advisory committees or parent councils or parent nights, school-wide celebrations that we hold, if we want to move the needle on student achievement in partnership with families, the parent-teacher conference is our highest leverage strategy. This is really critical work, and it takes incredible teamwork to pull this off. So we have, as you all know, almost 6,000 students and their families that we're trying to connect with one-to-one. Our conferences are hosted bilingually. We ensure language access for everyone, and schools work very hard to make conference schedules available and accessible to all families. All of our schools run their conferences differently, but they have the same goal, which is to facilitate these high-quality conversations. So just want to recognize all the staff who have been working very late hours these last couple weeks, being present, sticking around to take additional time with families, and ensuring that families feel welcome, heard, and valued through the process. And a huge want to really just share a huge amount of gratitude for families who are showing up with this work, showing up with questions and concerns, and really trying to lean in to partner with our schools. It's a critical component to ensuring student success. Additionally, wanted to celebrate our 9th and 11th graders who today took the PSAT, which was one of our critical metrics for measuring student academic growth and achievement. This school-wide testing, of course, requires all hands on deck. So big thanks to students and families for making sure our kids were ready to perform today, for adjusting to kind of adapted schedules. And then for our staff, flexing their schedules, their curriculum, their cadence to support test-taking activities. And we really look forward to seeing how our students have done on the test. So thanks to everyone working on that. And then last, just want to really thank our board members, who I want to remind everybody are volunteers, for all the time that folks have been investing over the last few weeks to make sure that we have our fall board member visits to schools. There's been a bunch lately. These visits, for those who don't know this, our board members commit to really taking time during the school year to go to every school, to talk with school leaders, to get into classrooms. And they help the board directors learn about strengths and challenges of each school and get a sense of school culture, climate, and classroom activities. So lots of thanks to our school leaders who've organized very thoughtful and transparent presentations, and who also coordinate classroom visits that show all of us a range of content and teaching styles. And a big thanks to the teachers and the students who often, just kind of keep rolling with it when our big group of board directors and administrators kind of just march right into their classroom with note papers and take notes, and the kids, it's been really fun to watch you all perform, and to the teachers who welcome us and just keep rolling. We're so impressed and grateful for the time.
Thank you. The next business in order is the superintendent report, which will be a district UIP presentation from Chief Park.
We're presenting the 2024-25 school year UIP this evening. Our district unified improvement plan is part of the work of the state to ensure that all of our districts and schools have a cycle of continuous improvement to improve student learning and system effectiveness. And part of it is also grounded in the Education Accountability Act of 2009, that each Colorado district and school does create an annual improvement plan. This is intended to be a culmination of strategic work that happens throughout the year. It is not intended to be a frantic thing that happens in 1 month in the fall. And so this is what you'll see in our district UIP is evidence of that. In the 2024 school year, CDE also released a streamlined template, which helps make the process a little bit smoother. And so it is also designed to include all of the components that need to meet state, federal, and program accountability requirements. This is a high-level flow chart that shows our prioritized student performance priorities, root causes, and major improvement strategies. And the font's pretty small. I did pull them out into separate slides. But what I do want to point out here is that this last year, we engaged in the entire year in a comprehensive strategic planning process for the next 5 years as a district. And what you'll see that is captured in both the performance priorities and our major improvement strategies is tight alignment to our second priority, which is rigorous learning for all. And so part of this initiative came out of pretty intensive work of many observations, our stakeholder groups input to identify this priority as one that is really critical as we think about access and success for all of our students, making sure that they can engage with high quality instruction every day, and specifically improve our outcomes for our students with disabilities and emerging bilingual students and our Latinx students. And so you'll see these 5 initiatives, not all 5, but 4 of these are tightly aligned to our major improvement strategies. After getting our district performance framework in late September, we did identify and confirm that these 4 areas were the prioritized student performance areas. So there's student attendance, elementary early literacy achievement, our middle school ELA growth and achievement, which as a level did experience pretty big declines between last year, between spring 2023 and spring 2024. And then our SAT reading and math for minority students and multilingual learners. Part of the work of the UIP is to identify the prioritized performance areas and engage in a thought process to identify what the root causes were. Again, this came out of a lot of intensive and thoughtful work over the past year to identify what are the root causes that are contributing to the prioritized performance outcomes. So you'll see these listed here, and a couple of things that have been consistent and persistent sort of questions and root issues. Couple of things I want to highlight here is the inconsistent feeling of sense of belonging and student mental health is something that we've identified in both our panorama data and our Healthy Kids Colorado survey data, if you remember from our last board presentation. There are some culture changes that we have engaged in over the past couple of years, and those things do take time. But also a core piece that you'll see in our priority on rigorous instruction is to make sure that we have equitable access to grade level content for all students. And when we think about that, we think specifically about the ways in which all of our students, whether it is a gen ed student, a student with a disability, a monolingual English speaking student, or an emerging bilingual student, can access the rigorous content in the classroom. We had also identified, and part of the work was with the extensive classroom observations with attuned education partners and what we see in our own observations as well, consistent, high quality, rigorous core instruction with appropriate scaffolds and accommodations that don't lower that rigor. And then finally, our tightening of our instructional coaching systems and consistency, the work which we started last year and have launched this year. So our 5 major improvement strategies here include reinforcing student attendance expectations. We did have an attendance celebration where we had some improvement year over year across the district in our average daily attendance, but we don't want to lose the focus on that. So we did leave that as a prioritized performance area because we're not quite at the 96% that we would like to get to. Setting rigorous and clear academic expectations across was identified because if we don't have a clear vision of excellence for what we want to see in every classroom or what instruction looks like, it is very hard to actually teach towards that. And so that is work that is happening. There's work that we identified where we need to develop and refine our high quality, culturally relevant curriculum. Several years ago, one of the big initiatives across the district was to make sure that we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum in all of our content areas and our grades. And we still want to make sure that that is happening because that is a foundational part of classroom experience. Our observation, feedback, and coaching systems, we'd identified this is a high leverage professional development actual activity to improve teaching in the classroom because it is personalized, it is relevant. We did a lot of work and are continuing to do a lot of work to ensure that we're aligned in high quality coaching, what it looks like with action steps and able to provide consistent support with that. And then finally, our unit and lesson unpacking and understanding. In particular, one of the areas we had identified in part of our strategic planning work was that in some classes, in several classes, even though there might have been high quality materials, the students were not necessarily consistently accessing it. And so we had identified that as another improvement strategy. I've linked here our draft action plan, which I don't have a slide of, but you can click into it and see it. And it is out where the specific action steps are outlined for each of the improvement strategies, along with the proposed deadlines and owners and status in that plan. And finally, when we look at our annual improvement plan, we do compare our current performance and our projected performance for 1 year and then 2 years. So you can see our projections and our goals for attendance, our middle school mean scale scores on CMAS ELA, and then our DIBELS and lecture achievement for our early elementary literacy. And then our SAT math, reading and writing. Specifically, we had pulled out the performance and the mean scale scores for minority students and our multilingual learners. So you can see the goals that are outlined for 24-25 and then 25-26. I don't know how tightly people follow all of our mission measures, but you'll see that some of the 5-year measures is aligned. And these are performance areas that we had identified as part of our mission measures as well in that strategic planning process. Our next steps are actually to get some feedback from the board here and then actually implement and monitor the steps that are outlined in the action plan. The thing I do want to highlight is the part of the action plan is meant to pull out and codify the work, the core work that is happening this year. It does not list every single thing that we're doing. There's a lot of work that we do to quote, keep the lights on, and it is a regular work, but we do want to highlight some of the core work that we have in our action plan. Open up for questions.
Thank you. So we'll now have 2 minutes for each board member to ask questions and provide comments, and then 5 minutes for the board as a whole. Director DeFreitas.
Sure. I appreciate the thoroughness with which we got to dive into this in the work session. So the board does have kind of a base level understanding going into the conversation. And I just, we were talking a little bit about how far forward the district has come in the development of these and the direction that they give in such a clear line item way. And I was just interested in if you could share just publicly what kind of involvement the local schools have, because they each do their own. Is it teacher-based? Where do you get your input from as these are coming? Is it all led by you, led by principals? Just sort of talk about that process development again.
Yeah, this one was largely built off of our work we did for the strategic plan. So we had lots of stakeholder conversations on what the core work should be and our priorities for the next 5 years. There is also consistent work with the principals and understanding their school performance framework or the district performance frameworks to identify are these right priorities for the year. This specific plan was presented to the DAC a couple of weeks ago to get their review and input and feedback as well. Primarily with the ACES team, which is our Achievement Culture and Equity for Students team, formerly known as the instructional team, engaged in more of the core planning of the action steps starting last June. And then we refined it after getting our district performance framework results. And so the working here in the district plan was largely with those groups. The schools and school leaders with their school-specific UIPs, they did submit them earlier in October. Actually, we reviewed them and gave them feedback to also confirm this aligns with what we're doing. And so what you'll see is pretty consistent focus areas across our schools in the areas identified as prioritized performance areas. And that makes sense because our district performance framework encompasses our performance of all of our schools in the district.
And have all schools have submitted and received feedback on a UIP?
The schools that submitted their draft UIPs did get feedback. We had several schools who were eligible to exercise biennial flex this year. They chose to do that this year. It doesn't mean that they don't have any kind of plan. They certainly do. And as part of the thoughtful work that they had put into the previous year's plan. And the schools that are eligible to exercise biennial flex are the ones who are on a performance plan in their school performance framework.
Dr. Tyler.
I would just like to echo the sentiment of what a great job has been done in these last 3 years in making the UIP comprehensive, overarching, detailed, and really looking for what we need to do as a school and making ourselves be in a better position. So thank you for all the work that's gone into that. I did have a couple of questions relating to the student performance priorities, and I still have a couple questions on how these are geared towards the different learners that we have in the schools, and especially for our emergent bilinguals. And I see that one of the performance priorities targeted minority students and multilingual learners in high school for math and reading. I would like to see more of that happening, especially at the elementary level also. I think in future plans, it'd be a great thing if we could have that sort of differentiated between the needs, because as we're looking at students who start kindergarten with us who are emergent bilinguals and are non-English proficient, that these students have different needs than do our Anglos who come speaking English already. And I think having those differentiated markers would be really great in the future if we could have a little bit more of that, and how that affects the equitable access to content depending upon their language levels. And I think that's something that I would like to see focused on more in our future UIPs. So thank you.
Thank you.
Director After.
Thanks for this. I have a few questions. What does the state do with it once you submit it?
Not much. Sorry, if someone's from CDE's listening. It's actually, so the way it works is that they, districts are responsible for accrediting the schools in the district. And so it's our responsibility to like review and make sure it's set. There's some schools, especially if they're on a prioritized improvement plan or turnaround plan, where the states do typically prioritize those schools. And so, there are typically some schools in a turnaround plan or prioritized improvement that have identified that they will take a closer look at. Typically, if a school is at performance, I haven't experienced them giving more feedback, but it's really more, hey, this needs to be done. Do it by this time. Do you have it ready?
Okay, so it's required, but you don't.
It was
expect
required
to
by
get-
statute, yeah.
but you don't expect to get feedback on it.
Not
But they
from the
might,
state.
but they could get feedback on specific schools.
They could, and
UIPs.
that's primarily if they're on a turnaround plan or prioritized improvement plan.
Okay. Can you just explain this? Oh, do you submit the action plan, the UIP action? plan?
It's
Okay.
linked, yep.
Yeah, so in the action plan, can you explain what the different statuses are? They're all green, which looks good. But what's the difference, for example, between something that is started and something that's on track? If it's started, does that mean it's not on track?
No, it just means it started. So it might depend on the month or time that it's intended to start, and you'll see, I mean, hopefully, right, if it's on track, it's because there was a start date that's not recent. So we'll know that it's on track versus just started.
And then if something is not started intentional, can you explain why we would? Is that just designed to be started at a later date?
Yep, if the original plan, I can see one right for the peak process
Yep.
docs in the handbook. In initially writing the plan, I put August 1st, but we would not start intentional. We've intentionally delayed it. I think I can update this timeframe. It wouldn't necessarily change the end date, but this is not a thing where, hey, this was supposed to start and it's mission critical to start it right now. We haven't, but if we prioritize another area in order, because it feels more important at this time, we'll know it's intentionally not started versus we forgot about it.
Okay. And then how much, I know you said that this piggybacked well on the strategic plan work that was being undertaken last year. How much work does it typically take for you to put this together, for your team to put this together every year? Is this a huge undertaking?
I think if it's done well, it's the difference between having incremental parts completed throughout the year because of intentional planning versus cramming it at one time. So the first time we did it because we didn't have one, it was an intensive amount of work because there wasn't anything. But it was due like 2 months after I got here. So that was hard. But I think once we get into like more of a cadence of planning and strategic planning, it is less challenging. I think interestingly, the biggest challenges in the past had been technical difficulties of the template had been one because and I think that actually deterred a lot of people because you put a lot of work in there and it wouldn't save and all the stuff. I think the other piece is too, it's a check, right? Like if you have a lot of things in a strategic plan or written or captured in a lot of different places, I actually think it's good disciplined work to put it into one place that everyone understands. And so that might feel like it is intensive work. I think it's important. And it feels a little bit more intensive in September and October than it might have in March because it's imminent. And there's a pretty quick time frame between the time we get our performance frameworks and between when this is due. And so that does feel challenging. It could feel challenging in a time where things are very busy in the fall as well.
Thanks.
Director Ramirez?
Yeah. So like the team mentioned, we were able to go through this in the work session. So thank you to our team for that. So you don't have any questions, but I do have some comments. One, I want to just mention, I think it's important because I think to some of our conversation earlier, we've all expressed how much we appreciate the work and the alignment that's gone on to make sure that we have a good UIP. But I also think in the need to create something and to like have something to prove, to show the state. I know that we as a team have also worked to tell the community and our parents and our staff stakeholders what a UIP is and why it's so important for us to have it. And so I think just to some of the conversation we had, every school, so all of our schools in the Roaring Fork School District, except I guess now we have some flex for some of them that aren't had that opportunity to not have to update theirs. But still, on the CDE website, all of our schools have a UIP, which is a Unified Improvement Plan, that we show basically as proof of like what our schools are working towards. The SACs, the school accountability committees in each school are supposed to approve them, which is why this board and our boards have really pushed for there to be alignment in that and for us to have functioning SACs. Because it is a document of the school to make sure that there is alignment in that school being successful. And then we as a school district have our UIP that is aligned to our values, to our strategic plan, to what we hope the schools will align their UIPs to us. And then that gets approved by the board. So it's, I think, I'm gonna ask for 1 minute because I just want to finish my comment. But I think it's incredibly important that we as a school board and us as a district community never forget that it took us a really long time to get here to this moment, and that we need to be consistent moving forward so that we are not finding ourselves in a moment in time where we are not holding ourselves or the district or schools accountable to the success of students across the district. So thank you to the team. Thank you to our leadership who has worked so diligently to make sure that we have this, that we are being successful and creating systems, because this matters, this work matters. And I really appreciate the dedication from our team to making sure that we are committed and accountable to making sure that we as a board see this, that our staff sees this, that there is a focus on this and making sure that we have it. And that structure is set in place. So thank you.
Thank you. I also don't have any specific questions on the UIP. Well, actually I do have one. How many schools did opt out of drafting a new IP, a new UIP this year using the biennial flex?
8. 7, sorry, 7.
7.
Mhm.
And was that communicated to the SACs at schools?
I'm not sure.
Probably don't know.
I don't do that. I
Yeah.
don't communicate with the SACs, but I'm not sure if they did. They should.
Went through school leaders.
And so what that means is that every school has at least one from 23, 24, and that's the oldest version they have. And then our schools who submitted a new one have one for 24, 25.
Okay. I was just curious because I know I had a question from one SAC member asked me about a school that is in performance. They are in green, didn't have to do it. And I was like, I don't think you're gonna get a new one this year. So maybe we need to make sure we let school leaders know that they should communicate that to their SACs. So
Yep.
their SACs aren't planning and preparing to review a new UIP.
They should actually, though, focus on implementation. Like that is a
Right.
key part of the work. And so they would, it's not like a plan from 23, 24 is no longer valid. I think a lot of the work still built on it. And so they should still feel like, are you implementing these things? Do you have some updates or revisions, which the schools do? None of the schools who exercise biennial flex, that's a double negative. The schools who exercise biennial flex still have intentional priorities and focuses for this year that they've planned. The work of transferring that to a UIP template wasn't done, but that doesn't mean that they don't have an intentional plan for this year.
Right.
So that is, they can and should still be sharing those focus areas for this year.
Maybe that's something where I can connect with the DAC members that built out the SAC handbook to include some comments about that. So there isn't confusion
Oh, yeah.
in future years. And I can do that.
Mhm.
Just 'cause I don't want that to be confusing for SACs and them to feel like they're not getting a new UIP when,
Yeah, because it is grounded in the school's strategic work.
right.
And they all have updated strategic work and priorities, so.
And as we've all said, this being kind of the third year that we are completing UIPs with Fidelity, I think it's still some learning and growing for all of those involved.
Yep.
But I really just wanted to echo the thanks for all of the work on this. I think that, as I said in work session, and I want to say it for the public to hear too, this is a massive shift for our district to have a solid plan moving forward, both for the district and for each school, and to be talking with engagement groups about implementing it. And it's something that I, as a board member, as a parent, am very grateful for this work. And I know that it was a big lift as director after asked about
It
it.
is.
I know that first year was a massive lift to get it moving, but seeing it become more routine and something that is just ingrained in our culture is a really big win. And oftentimes I don't think that I personally pause and think about that. So when it hit me in work session, I just wanted to echo it here. So thank you for all of the work on this. We'll have 5 minutes of open for discussion, for questions, comments, if anyone has anything else.
I do have one other thing. So is it right that if a parent wanted to see their schools or a teacher wanted to see their school's UIP, they would look on school
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 View, it's publicly
View.
posted.
Okay, and then, so that's just a comment for the public, if anyone wants to see it, that
Mhm.
they're accessible.
One thing that is weird, and I don't know the reason, because I looked at School View for District 1 and I clicked on it and you can pull it up, but some big pieces seem to be missing,
Okay.
which were in the PDF. So I don't know what that technical end is. So I would just, if you don't see all the pieces, it doesn't necessarily mean because it's not in there. So, but the PDF is something that could be shared as well.
Is it on our website?
Is what?
Is
Or
is the UAP on our website?
No, I think School View is actually the best place to go because it, any updates in there, it's a live document, will update directly in School View.
Anything else?
I did want to emphasize, I know that I paused when you asked if it was a lot of work. It is a lot of work. I don't want to underplay that. It's pretty significant, but it's important.
Thanks. Thank you again. At this time, we welcome members of the public who have signed up to address the board. There are 2 speakers signed up tonight. The board allots 45 minutes for public comment. To respect the time of all who are present, speakers are asked to limit their remarks to 3 minutes or less. Reminder to all speakers to uphold our procedures for public comment. We ask you to be thoughtful and constructive with your comments, and thank you in advance for sharing your feedback. Members of the public who wish to share their views with the board may always do so in writing at any time. And for this evening's public comment, we received 1 written comment. Our first speaker tonight is Sarah Taylor.
Good evening, Roaring Fork School Board. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you tonight. My name is Sarah Taylor and I'm a paraprofessional at Glenwood Springs Elementary School. I'm here to address a critical issue, one that directly affects our students in the future of this district, the need for a living wage for paraprofessionals in special education. As you may know, paras are essential in making classrooms run smoothly. We assist teachers by preparing materials, setting up activities, managing behavior, and providing one-on-one support with students in special education. Our support allows teachers to focus on instruction while ensuring that students receive the care that they need. Beyond these duties, paras play a key role in upholding the IDEA, which is a law that guarantees that students with disabilities receive equal access to education. It is paras who make this inclusion a reality, ensuring that these students can learn and grow beside their peers. This issue is especially urgent in our district because of the high cost of living in our community. While paras across the country are often underpaid, the impact is even more severe here. The average salary for paras nationwide is around $40,000, yet many paras in our district make significantly less. In addition, the housing costs in our district are 53% higher than the national average, and our overall living expenses are 23% higher. Many of us, despite dedicating our time and energy to the success of our students, are struggling to make ends meet. When paras are forced to juggle multiple jobs to survive, this often leads to burnout. Burned out paras struggle to give their full attention and energy to students who require consistent support. On top of that, working multiple jobs leaves little time to build a family or maintain a personal life. It's heartbreaking that those of us who play such an essential role in student success are denied a well-balanced life. We're helping shape the future for our students in this district, but we are left wondering how we can secure a future for ourselves. This issue has created a significant recruitment and retention problem for para positions within the district. Recently, the CDE flagged our district as having a 38% increase in special education referrals, highlighting the growing need for support. However, many open para positions remain unfilled in our district because our wages don't keep up with the cost of living. Our district has the opportunity to create lasting, meaningful change, not just for paraprofessionals, but for the entire community. By offering higher pay, you send a powerful message that this district truly values every educator who plays a vital role in our students' success. Thank you for your time and consideration. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Fatima Corral.
Good evening. My name is Fatima Corral, and I have previously worked as a school liaison for early childhood education in our community. I have 3 daughters in the Roaring Fork School District. My youngest one receives special education services. I am here to express my concerns regarding the protocols being implemented in our district. The Roaring Fork School District has failed to live up to its mission to ensure that every student develops the skills, knowledge, and character to thrive in our changing world. In the last 2 years, I have experienced insufficiency in direct communication with my students' school. I find the lack of commitment to providing quality special education unacceptable. 10 months ago, I noticed a regression in my youngest daughter's speech and overall well-being. She is only in elementary. Immediately, I made a meeting with the teachers in school where my family and I became aware that the direct one-on-one support my daughter was receiving through her school and special education had changed. She was no longer receiving in-person support, nor was it at one-on-one. By the time I find out, 4 months had passed since the changes had been implemented. No communication was made by the school to contact me about these changes that directly affected my students' academic and social emotional performance. It was frustrating to realize that we were halfway through the school year and my student nor I felt supported by her school. This meeting did not provide me with the answers to my concerns and left me in the state of distress. I later received a letter that helped explain what was happening. This letter was to inform us that the special education teacher did not hold a teaching license. I grew even more concerned. My student had been with this teacher for 2 years now. How could it be that this information was only provided to me after I expressed concerns in my child's well-being? Student services did not help or support my student with her needs, and this has resulted in unfair evaluation and negatively impacts on my student's persona. As a result of not receiving the necessary and specific service from her IEP, my student is now experiencing emotional distress and is in need of extra support outside of school. Although I'm privileged to know the school system, resources in the community, know the IEP process and my parents' rights to advocate for my student, these 10 long stressful months have been debilitating. I am here asking for your support as a district to ensure that my daughter has the tools and services necessary to succeed in school, that all students are being provided with quality education that prepares them for a changing world, that all parents, including myself, have the support of the school and the district and are being communicated in a timely manner to any changes in their children's education. As a parent of a district, I do not feel supported or heard. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next business in order is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel, minutes from our previous board meeting, policies e.g. AEA, GBEA, GBEC, GBGB, GBJ, and repeal of policy GBL. Directors, are there any items that you would like to pull off the consent agenda for a separate discussion and vote? Being none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I move that the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
Please call the vote.
Director Ramirez,
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg,
Aye.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Teitler,
Aye.
Director After.
Aye.
The next business in order is discussion on policies BC, BE, BEC, BEDF, BEDH, IC, IKF-E, EHC, and regulations BC-R and EEAEAE-R. Director Taylor, we'll begin with you.
Okay. First one I wrote down, I have mislabeled because I put it as GBA and I see we have no GBA. And so that doesn't quite work well. It was titled in the fourth paragraph, if I can find out which one it was. It says, moreover, to avoid a conflict of interest, the district prohibits an employee from exercising supervisory, appointment, dismissal authority, or disciplinary action over a member of the employee's immediate family. So my question in that is, if we have a
Are you talking about the GBEA policy?
must be,
We just approved those on
okay,
consent.
that was the consent agenda one. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know where I saw that. That is the one about person not having somebody else that works for them or their
I
family.
believe it is.
I didn't think I even opened there, so I'm not understanding where, maybe that is where it was. Can I ask my question still? Within that, then, if somebody is a teacher and is a principal and they have a family member work, is the family member allowed to work at the school? And can they be supervised by the vice principal then, or is a family member not allowed to work at the school?
Great question.
And we have had the opportunity because we have so many incredible staff and their entire family is part of our staff. The principal is as the kind of ultimate director of that school. We draw the line with the principal having a member of their family in that same building. We allow assistant principals to have members of their family in the same building because the principal can supervise that person. And that has been the way we have interpreted this rule in the past, is so it's that a principal cannot have a family member in the building working in the school, but an AP could.
Thank you. My other one was on staff personnel, security and safety and GBGB.
That was also just approved
That
on
was-
consent. So we're on the B policies that are for
Why
review
did
tonight.
that happen and what did I open? Wow.
Do you want me to go to director after and then
Sure.
come back? Okay.
I'm confused. Thank you.
Director after.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't have any questions about the B policies. Those were very clear and well written, I thought. On IC, the school year / school calendar. Can you just talk a little bit about how, I understand that there's the state mandates us to have certain number of instruction days or hours. And then for this policy, we can add more to that as long as we're above the state's minimum threshold. Is that right?
Yes. I don't actually think it's outlined in this policy, but yes, we can.
Okay. And then we can define from this policy, I understood that we can define what like actively engaged in the educational process includes and doesn't include. So like recess is not included in.
That's actually state defined, so it
It's state
would.
defined.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I didn't really have any questions on this one either. Then this was well timed since we're in calendar committee discussions pretty often right now. So this was helpful for me to see actually. That's all.
Director Ramirez.
I don't have any questions because we went over this in policy committee. I think there were some, and I'm remembering that we wanted Brent to go into the home rule thing. I saw his response. I guess my ask would just be if we check to see what the limits were for the cities, and if not, we should probably do so. Maybe put this into our next policy committee meeting if that's before board meeting. And then I wanted to flag one edit. I'm trying to remember, it was like the 70, do you remember, Anna? It was like 72 to 24.
Yeah, I think I think it's in the board meetings when it gives the public notice. Is that the one where we?
Yeah,
Yes, that's the one on BE, school board meetings
we opted.
for 24
Yeah.
versus 72.
Oh, yeah. So just for special meetings, we just made sure to keep it at 24 hours in advance of a special meeting. And then on BEDH, public participation at school meetings, I think that we added board member presiding instead of board president.
Mhm.
And that was pretty much it. These were kind of easier, I guess. I shouldn't say that, but good. But I don't know that we had any other things that we sent to Brent. Anna, do you remember?
No, it really was that home rule, and we're still working on clarification there. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Director DeFreitas?
I would just two things, quickly on some of the B memos. I forget which one it was. I think it's one of the code of conduct. Sorry, I pulled the thing up. The line is, three consecutive no-shows equal, we cancel the board member, right?
Yeah, they're removed or there. I don't remember the exact language.
It was,
I know I just looked at that too.
BC.
It's not. It's not BC.
Sorry, which one are we?
and I just wanted to clarify, and then the replacement is appointed by the current board, right?
If there's ever a time, it's under state statute, if there's ever a time that a board member resigns outside of elections, then the
Yes.
board appoints their replacement until the next
Oh,
election.
it's B.
It's B.
B, the first, right? Or maybe not.
Yeah, the board will declare a vacancy if a board member fails to attend 3 consecutive regular board meetings unless the board member's absence is otherwise excused. But I wasn't sure. So is it, if there's a vacancy, it's appointment, or does a vacancy open an election? Or something?
No, a vacancy is appointment.
Okay.
Yeah, it's appointment until the next election. So, and then
Okay.
that seat is up for election. It's not like appointment for a 2-year term. It's appointment for the remainder of that term.
Right.
And then it goes on the same cycle as the other elections.
Thank you for clarifying. And then I was wondering, since I'm not on policy committee, I know you guys have probably covered this, IKFE graduation requirements exhibit markup. We get a lot of questions about the college and career readiness of our graduates. So I was just wondering if, Dr. Cole, if you could weigh in on how you feel this matrix does in meeting those goals.
You know, and I would love to have Chief Park also respond to that question. I mean, you know, what we're proposing is just a pretty small change in alignment with kind of the state changes with cutoff scores of the PSAT here, and then including AP pre-calculus. But your question is broader. You know, I think it's sticky, and I know that the demonstrating college and career readiness is even something that is being grappled with at the state level of like, really, what are the indicators of that? How do we show that? This iteration, and we talked about this a lot in policy committee, we have worked on this frequently over the last 4 years. It has seen a lot of revisions. And I know that we've really dug into that question of what does college and career readiness mean, and how do we identify that? It's pretty dynamic, sometimes feels like a moving target in terms of the work, especially in career and technical education. I don't know that I've thought a ton about whether this feels right and move forward in a really well-informed way, but would love to have Chief Park. But if you have anything else, I know
It's okay if that's a little too broad. I didn't mean to dump that on you. I just hadn't seen this one before.
I think I just want to clarify that there's district graduation requirements, which is policy IKF, but IKFE as exhibit is the state graduation requirements. And so there's 2 metrics that we need to hit. And the state graduation requirements does, if you look at CDE, there's a menu of options. And so some of those, the local boards do identify what from the menu of options are we going to include in our board approved demonstration of state requirements. So
Okay.
they're two different things, and students do need to meet both metrics. Both the
That-
district graduation requirements and the state, yeah.
That clarifies it. I had missed that this was the state one. Thank you.
Director Tyler?
I would just like to ask one follow-up question on that, looking at IKFE. If the SAT assessment, I imagine, is the first go-to, if the student has at least a 470 and a 480, then they've met that requirement.
The state requirement. They
The
still need
state
to meet the
requirement,
district
right.
requirement, yep.
If they haven't met that state requirement, can you sort of tell us, like, where do we usually go as a district in this table? As like, there's a lot of different things, but and maybe you've heard that we're doing work keys to some extent, but like, do we have a general, and especially maybe for our ELL population, where is their state requirement being met?
Yep. So we should have everybody have the opportunity to attempt the SAT. So that's the first line, I suppose, and that is a state required assessment in the spring. If students don't pass the SAT, they can either attempt it again or they can take the AccuPlacer, and that's typically the next sort of line. And so that you'll see that at the bottom of the first page, top of the first page, AccuPlacer assessment. If they don't pass the AccuPlacer assessment, then they can attempt the work keys. One thing to note is the line on ACT work keys assessment that demonstrates English readiness. The state menu of options doesn't specify English readiness. The board approved IKFE from the past does specify English readiness. Actually, part of that is because we have consistently asked the state to put into writing, would you accept readiness in a different language? And they have not agreed to put that in writing. And so one of the things we do hold tightly to is in here, just because it's outlined here, to demonstrate English readiness. So that's part of the reason too, where we start with the SAT, then they can take AccuPlacer, they can attempt work keys. There are other, as you can see, there's AP assessments as well. We have a number of students who take the AP exam and they can get a qualifying score there. So, but the AP is not a required state exam. SAT is in the spring. There are assessments in here that to my knowledge, we don't typically give, like the ASVAB. We obviously don't have international baccalaureate assessments here. The district capstone project that's listed here is a little different actually than the required capstone project that is from the district graduation requirements. And so if there is a district in the state that doesn't require capstone, that is something that they have at the state to demonstrate state college and career readiness.
So if a student were to come in 11th grade as a level student from another country, and they came here in 11th grade, or maybe especially in 12th grade, do they have a road to graduate at the end of the year? And what would that be?
Yep. So they might pass the SAT math, for example, but might not get a qualifying score in EBRW. So then they can take the AccuPlacer, one of the AccuPlacer assessments that meets the English cut score criteria. If they don't pass that, then they can attempt work keys. And if they don't pass any of those, we do have a portfolio option for a very limited number of students who can demonstrate readiness if they haven't been able to demonstrate it through any of the options here.
And where is that in the state, in this state requirement, graduation requirement, that there's that portfolio?
It is, if you look at the language in our IKF policy, there is a line in there that said I don't remember the exact quote, certain measures, there may be a modification allowable that's approved by the chief academic officer. It's a pretty extensive portfolio if they would like to turn that in.
And how many, when we have students that are counted as they drop out, they don't graduate, how many of them make it through the senior year and then don't meet the requirements after finishing senior year?
Through any of the methods? I mean, because there's
there's
a lot of methods that they could meet.
right.
the
So like
expectations.
one of these methods in this chart or the portfolio, if we say a student finishes their 12th grade year, are we assuming that they are somehow graduating if they've met the number of courses that they need to take?
If they've met both district graduation requirements and the state graduation requirements, whether that's through tradition, whether they have all the credits or they have a qualifying score in one of these measures, or if there's a request for some kind of modification of the district graduation requirements for extenuating circumstances, or if there's a portfolio request for an extenuating circumstance, they can certainly do that.
Okay, so just once more, I'll try to see if I can say it more clearly what I'm trying to think. So do we have students that make it through 12th grade, have taken the classes that they're expected to take, and then not be able to pass one of these measures?
Yes, and in those cases, they have the option of submitting a portfolio. We're able to flag that pretty easily, or sorry, not easily, but earlier on. The portfolio is not intended to be a Hail Mary of sorts in the spring. And part of that is because they have an attempt at SAT and PSAT in the spring, or earlier on taking the AccuPlacer. So we'll know it's not like an April or May thing to know if a senior is on track to graduate or not. The counselors keep a pretty close eye on students who are on track or who are off track and where we need to plan for them.
All right, thank you.
I just have a couple of follow-up questions on BEDH. And I wasn't at policy committee, so I apologize if you guys talked about this. Feel free to jump in. I just want to confirm that we are aligning this with the regulation or updating the regulation. I think it's a little bit unclear with eliminating the section about questions, because as a practice, this board doesn't engage in conversation with public comment. There are other portions of this policy that refer to like when questions are asked, or if there needs to be further investigation about questions. So I just want us to all be on the same page about responding to questions or just accepting public comment, which is a discussion that we've had a couple of years ago, but not in recent times. And then to update BDH-R, which is the regulation that more precisely outlines the process of public comment for the public and outlines kind of the conduct that's expected. The question piece is the big piece that I think we should make clear. If we're not taking questions and engaging in conversation during board meetings, I don't think we should reference it in the policy. And then on.
Do you want us to answer that?
Yeah, did you guys talk about it? Yeah.
We didn't talk about it, but I think what we went over was the board member presiding over the meeting will be responsible for recognizing all speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was just the assumption of like the board member or person presiding over the meeting, should there be questions asked by the public, would be referred to the superintendent or superintendent's designee, not necessarily in session. But if you think that we need to take that out or clarify it.
I think we just need to clarify it, because the way that it reads now, you would be referring to public commentary like during the meeting. Like, this should be directed to the chief of HR. This should be directed to, whoever the person might be. And that's not currently our practice.
Right. So would that be will be referred to instead of may? Or questions asked by the public that require?
I mean, I think that in my mind, there would be, and I haven't thought this through, but I think there would be a permissive, if board directors or the superintendent believe that there should be a follow-up conversation, they may reach out to the person to answer questions or provide further information. Which I kind of think that's a given, and right, that we do that. But if we want to include something, just the way that it's read, like people ask us questions all the time in every single public comment, right? And it's not the practice of the board to get into a conversation, because we're not going to be able to resolve those issues during public comment time. So I just think we need to clean that up a little bit.
Maybe questions asked during public comment that require further investigation will be referred to the superintendent.
But even then, I think it needs to be more permissive, because some questions that are asked are just things that might not be a priority or something that we can or have the ability to address immediately. I think we need to be more permissive with it, and I think we need to think through it a little bit more.
Can we just add that to policy committee? And
yeah, I'm
other
sorry,
discussion
I
there?
just haven't fully fleshed
And
it
the
out in my own
extent to
mind yet.
which written public comments where people aren't here, but I would say that whatever is decided for.
Yeah,
the spoken
should
comment
apply to both.
Should apply to both.
Yeah.
Can
And
we
then
just capture everything that we just decided. Yeah, so I just want to make sure that we're gonna pull back BEDH to policy committee. Let's also pull in the regulation to make sure that they're aligned. And then director, after you just said something else that I was like, oh, and that's the third thing.
ensure that written comments
written
are
comments
treated
apply.
the same as.
Treated the
spoken
same,
comments.
perfect, yep, okay.
And then my other question is on BE with the 24 72-hour notice. So 72 hours was recommended by CASB. Okay.
Yeah.
So I pulled up the statute and I think we just need to be precise with words because the statute says that for a special meeting, it shall be in the hands of the member no later than 24 hours prior to the hour set for the meeting, comma, and if it is mailed, comma, it shall be mailed no later than 72 hours prior to the hour set for the meeting. And so I think this obviously doesn't take into account email, which is what we've identified in our policy. And so I think if we delineate this by saying that each board member receive actual notice 24 hours in advance. So like we have to ensure that they actually know that it's happening, either if that's a read receipt from an email or a phone call. But I think if we include something like that, we can have 24 hours and I would prefer to have 24 hours.
Actually, so Brent added notes on this. I just saw that. Did you see that, Anna?
Yeah, we had, because we had questions about the waiver comment, which I don't know that I'm still 100% clear, the paragraph below.
Oh,
That we were looking for some more clarity there. But I think that,
Sorry,
I think
I don't want to.
I think it's a little different than what Director Kluenberg is meaning, which what I'm hearing you
Right.
say is like either add,
Well,
like
well,
needs to be acknowledged.
I'm
So
saying
the
that
waiver
because
notice, so I mean, what happens oftentimes in hostile boards, right, is that you hold a special meeting to make some decision. And a board member either says they didn't have notice of it to invalidate the meeting, or they try to invalidate whatever decisions were made. And all that's saying is that if they show up at the meeting, that they can't claim that they weren't notified of the meeting. Like they waive any argument around notice.
no, I was saying that because I just noticed when you said electronic mail,
Uh-huh.
that wasn't there when we went through policy committee.
Oh,
So that's why I'm seeing that Brent added all this language because I did not see any of that. So my suggestion was to keep it at 24 hours in advance because it was coming from the secretary. And so therefore, if we were having an emergency meeting, it would be 24 hours. Right? Because we have to be able to notice it.
yeah.
But that by electronic mail was not there. So I'm seeing that Brent also put delete 72 at 2:04. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why he also deleted it, but
Cause he wrote in 24 hours, he wrote it out
oh.
next to it. Or somebody, it says it twice.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had moved to 24 hours. I don't think he changed anything substantially in the hours, but you're right, the
Mhm.
electronic mail was clarified. I think we were.
Mhm.
And he
Unsure.
probably knows that there's some case law defining email versus mail, because the statute is old.
At the bottom. Very bottom. Note 4 says that the district is under 6,500 people. It can be through electronic 24-hour.
I mean,
Then I think it's fine.
do you want to put, I mean, we could put language in there that says something to the effect of like, every attempt should be made using telephone and other communication strategies.
Wait, no, that's a good suggestion.
Okay,
I don't think so.
okay. Because I mean, there's a world in which people don't check their email every 24 hours, but.
Well, that's why I say, like, if you were to put actual notice, like actual notice means that they've seen it or you've spoken to them or like you've physically told them.
Mhm.
So, but if Brent says this is fine, then I'm fine trusting. So. Those are my only-
I guess my question to the team though would be, would you prefer to have actual notice so you don't have a mad board member that they didn't get notice, even though this policy is going to state 24 hours even by electronic mail?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. If we were in the
I mean,
environment.
that's a
where there
question
was
to the team
a
because I think
hostile board and
Just
we were trying to get people
saying.
together to do something quickly.
Do you want to move that to policy committee and we'll just, okay.
Yeah, let's pull it into policy committee. So let's pull BE back as well to discuss just the technical components of that.
Yeah. And I did just go through, I totally missed all of Brent's notes on this, so thank you for that flag. Catherine.
That was all I had on these. So we kind of have already gone into open board discussion, but if anybody has anything else on any other policies, we've got 5 minutes.
Sorry, I did have one. Oh, man. Oh, it was on EHC, second read. I just wanted to flag, I saw, Director Platt put include but not limited to. Doesn't look like anybody has resolved that comment. So I just wanted to make sure that if you guys wanted to include that language, that it was added to the policy.
I think so.
And then I had one edit on the drug and alcohol testing for bus drivers, that first sentence. I just took the out because it is a requirement of federal regulations. And then on that second sentence, it talks about the federal regulations. So I wanted to make sure that we clarified. That was my only edit.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next business in order is a CFO update from Chief Chicoine.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, do you want us to jump right in?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. We'll start with Director Ramirez.
absolutely. Yes.
Well, it's nice to be here and have, so we had our finance committee meeting on Monday. I think that there are still a lot of questions and a lot of need for clarity. I think some of the biggest things that, as a team we talked through was just the need for consistent communication coming out of the team. And just making sure that we are, as much as possible, sharing our next phase or how we're going into this next phase. So I don't have any questions because I feel like, at least on my end, I have had the opportunity to do a little bit of a deep dive with the team. But I also wanted to make sure to mention what we talked about, because I do think that there was agreement in our conversation that we wanted to make sure that we had communication, that we were being really intentional with what we were sharing with the community, with our staff, to helping make sure that that trust that we want to work towards was being maintained. And then the one other thing I'll mention is just that, there was a conversation on making sure that we, as much as possible, made intentional strides to stay away from anything that had to do with K-12 student like education. I think that for me as a board member is incredibly important, that this was an adult error that comes from the district, and that we try as much as possible to stay away from it affecting students or being at student expense. Good, thanks.
Director DeFreitas?
Yes, since I wasn't in finance committee, I apologize if I asked like the really basic level.
Oh, please.
And we do
Yeah.
have a full item on the health insurance.
Right, yeah. that's
So
fine, but not-
don't feel
not
like you have
that.
to squeeze it all in here.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was just interested in the 2023-24 audit statement.
Mhm.
2 tiers of these errors that we need to work through, and we're currently on the first one. Can you clarify that sentence? What errors and why?
So
Tiers.
this is a part, every school district within the state of Colorado has to go through the data pipeline. And what happens with that data pipeline reporting is that you import all of your chart accounts data. And then they have this behind the scenes formula or calculation or software that spits out then all the things that you have to fix. And every school district has to fix a lot. When you go through data pipeline, it's very normal, especially the way that this particular district just manages its discretionary funding. Sometimes those accounts, we know we have to change those once we get that finally completed and reconciled. And so that's just understood that we're going to do that. But there's also some other things that that change throughout the years. For example, with early childhood education, they had a whole slew of new codes coming out this year that were actually brought out after the budget process. So we already budgeted 23-24 based upon the old codes. And so now we're having to kind of shift and move those all around, which is part of the work this year. But it's just cleanup. And then so the whole goal is by the time you get through those tiered reports, that your data is really clean and is 100% in compliance with all the chart of accounts requirements that CDE has. So that's a very good question. Yeah.
But the tiers and the level and numbers of errors you're saying are within normal limits from what you've seen?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Like the types of errors and the number of them, that's within normal limits of just going through this process?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. And then plus just the way that we report as well. And then some of the changes that have happened over on early childhood side, I would say, given those two additional items, I would say they're in the normal range.
Yeah. Director Tyler?
I was wondering if I could just ask an overall general budget question. I know we have the 10% of our budget and then the 3%. And what are the reasons for which we have those is sort of my general question, because like, it seems like they're for emergencies and it seems like we're in an emergency. And so why would we not be accessing part of that and using that now to help us and not have to say, if we do that next year, within 1 year, we need to be at that 10% again. So like, what would be the instance in which we could dip into that, and why wouldn't we be doing that now?
That's a wonderful question. I think that that's very, it's a very depthful question that I hope that this board really does a deep dive on actually this year. It's on my radar and I think also Anna's as well. And what you're referring to is like our savings account, if you will. It's called fund balance for school district finance. And so the minimum, and I'll just say for our public as well, just so people that don't know, our minimum requirement for our fund balance currently in our general fund is 10% of our revenues. And then on top of that, there's the additional 3%, which is what's called a TABOR, Taxpayers Bill of Right, emergency reserve. So that's compliance related. Okay. So then you add those two together and roughly 13% of our costs. So the minimum fund balance, you know, really what that's to be utilized for mostly is for emergencies. We're in a state of an emergency and that is true. We want to be really cautious because we have, well, let me see if I could back up a second. That 10% is a fairly low, on the low end of what you would want on a fund balance policy in the first place. And so you have to really protect that with all your strength, kind of, because if you get mid-year cuts from the state or something like that, and you fall below that 10% and then you don't replenish that right away, that means that you're looking at mid-year reductions in force or, you know, reductions in salary and things like that. And we want to be a bit more able to be nimble with those kinds of unfortunate impacts of the economy and things like that. And that would be what we would want to protect that fund balance for, is so that we could continue to operate without those types of impacts on our students and on our staff. And so that's why I talk about that the 10% minimum fund balance is pretty low. And it's not, I mean, it's still within, reasonable guidelines, but to go much lower than that and to dip into that by, to say that now we're just going to be at 5%, that really puts the district in a position that if there is any adjustment in revenue that we can't ever go to a negative fund balance situation, because of Tabor requirements and other things, and it really kind of puts us at risk. We're getting a little bit too close to that red zone, if you will, because there's going to be fluctuations during the year, or you could have a big expense. Let's just say something happens and you need a new boiler or something like that. I mean, you need to have something on top of your normal contingencies you can tap into in case of an unforeseeable emergency, which this is, but then we have to be thoughtful within that too about how we can also bring that back to where it needs to be. So in case there is something coming in the future that we're ready for it. Does that help?
That helps. I still would ask as like a follow-up. So this 10% of the general fund balance is through board policy.
Correct.
And you say that 10% is on the lower end. Can you say what maybe average school districts have?
I would say an average school district, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of things, and that's where the deep dive kind of comes in. So I'm going to just talk in generalities. The bigger the school district, the lower the percent of fund balance, because the dollar of that percentage is higher. And so we're a mid-sized district. Okay. So I'm just going to say, given a mid-sized district, I could see that districts usually would run in the 20 to 45% would be fairly normal, 45 to 50% higher, and 10% would be on the lower end for a mid-sized district. Does that help with that? That's what I would say off the cuff, but there's a lot of variables with that because you have to look at your, how much you're borrowing for your, bond redemption fund. And for your, against, and so there's some of those kind of impacts, and it also your property tax and the percentage of your total revenues that is property tax based, which is always received in the spring, is also another thing that's to be considered. So there's within that normal range, there's a lot of considerations.
And speaking of the property tax part that you're talking about, and we were presented about this state. I don't know if it was called an insurance policy, some state program that we could participate in, so we don't run into those state deficits, those deficits that rely on property taxes. Where do we stand with that, and when does that go into effect or not go into effect?
So that's a very good questions. So it really is I'm watching that very carefully because, as I stated earlier, some of the cash dollars for beginning fund balance were overstated in the initial, resolution that were provided to you. So that means that we could need to borrow a little earlier than we think. But, so I'm looking at that month to month to month. Right now, we're looking at needing to borrow either in December or January. There's in the state loan program currently is at a 0%. So there's no cost of that loan lending to the district. Back, I think it was in 2008, but somewhere in that range or that area, the state actually talked about taking that away or requiring the school districts to pay interest on that. And so there is a little bit of a caution to put in dipping too much into that and just saying that that's just fine, no big deal, because it is legislated by the state and they can change that 0% to where it could be a much higher cost for the district. So it's just something that also to watch, I guess. But right now that's not in play.
So if we were to decide as a board and say we did want to help with this financial situation by going into that 10%, is that something that is available if we did decide to go that way, or is it not available?
I would say that it's something that is available. We have some amount over the minimum. And I think it would really depend on everybody's recommendations on where people felt comfortable with the fund balance. I would caution against that approach as a CFO. Just, out of that concern for potential losses, because we're hearing some pretty bad news from the state at the same time. So if we had a more pleasant view of the future from the state level, maybe that might be a better approach. But that's where I would also caution. So it's always a balance.
Director After?
I don't have any questions on the memo. Thanks for providing it. Director DeFreitas asked my main question, and I'm eager to get to the next item on the agenda. So nothing for me. Are you gonna do good minutes?
I'll start with you. Yeah. I don't have anything specific on the memo either. I think that I'm ready to jump into the health insurance conversation. So we will move over to that unless anyone else has anything else within the 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes.
You have a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention one thing because Director Trades asked about the errors.
Oh,
On the audit, and I just wanted to clarify because it's two-part errors, right? And so the first one that I think Director DeFreitas was asking about was the very generic, these are some of the errors that are common that you would find in an audit. And then the second part, I just wanted to make sure to clarify, and if you could maybe share what the second error is, because I don't want to confuse the team on the distinction. I can't even speak anymore. Distinction.
thanks, Jasmine. That's a great question too, is that the way that it's set up for the data pipeline is that you have to go through and change and move or remove all of your tier 1 data errors before you can even see what your tier 2 is. So I don't know what that level is yet. So these are just the simpler errors of the first ones to go through. So I'll have to keep updating you guys on that.
And this is separate from the work that has been our team is doing to fix other errors, correct?
That's true. It's a normal part of the audit process before we get audited. But yeah, I think, from anything else that we've already discussed, this is something that's a bit separate and actually a bit more normal that all school districts go through to some level, but I'll keep you guys apprised on what I find on the data, the tier 2.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure we clarified that it was good. Thank you.
The next business in order is an action on a resolution to terminate the district's self-insurance plan. Do I have a motion to approve the resolution to terminate the district's self-insurance plan?
I move that the board approve the resolution to terminate the district self-insurance plan as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
We will now have 2 minutes of discussion for each board member and then 5 minutes of open discussion. Director Tyler, could we start with you on this one?
Director
Yes.
Kuhlenberg, can we start? And I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that okay with the presentation?
Yeah,
before
we
talk?
have, Noel?
Yeah, Noel.
Noel
Yep, Noel Cruz
from-
is here. Noel's an actuarial consultant who we retained through this process with the purpose of ensuring that the estimates and projections that we were making in terms of potential losses related to our health insurance were accurate and that our recommendations to the board were on point. And so Noel and his team have done an incredibly in-depth analysis of our kind of where we are. And so it was really important to us that the board and our community hear from Noel directly on his findings and work and how those findings have influenced this recommendation. So would love to give him a little bit of time to talk through these slides and allow your questions then to also be directed to Noel or Chief Platt or Chief Chacoin or me. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Okay, so Noel, I know you're on Zoom. I can drive your slides for you if you just let us know when to advance.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
We gotcha.
Cool. And if you do say Noel, it's totally fine. I've been dealing with it 40+ years. I'm totally used to it, so I'm good. So yeah, my name is Noel Cruz. I work for Siegel Consulting. We are an actuarial consulting firm. And if you just want to go to the next slide real quick. So, Christy and Anna reached out to us to ask for a little bit of help and kind of taking a look at this and providing another set of eyes on it. So, we were asked to take a look at, plan termination for the self-insured plans. Obviously, I think you all are aware of when you made the change, kind of what the change was, but there were a few components of this change that were self-insured, which means you are fully responsible for the risk associated with the plan. You did purchase stop loss insurance to help out there a little bit. And given the size of your group, that made a lot of sense. 670-ish people enrolled currently is a group that can be highly volatile. And so what I mean by that is large claimants, spike claimants can have a much larger impact on a group of around 500 to 600 to 700 than it can a group of 1,500 to 2,000, right? We just don't have enough bodies to spread the cost across from a risk perspective. So we did take a look at the components that were self-insured, which was the medical plan and the pharmacy plan provided by Lucent Health and ProAct RX. We also looked at the medical or the dental division as well, even though they were fully insured, just to take a look at to see any kind of responsibilities or things of that nature that would be there if the plan were to terminate. And then ultimately part of this too, it's not a self-insured product, it's a risk product. The stop loss was purchased as a portion of the self-insured plan. And so we took a look at that as well. And again, trying to go through and take a look at, I know what a lot of you have had discussions about previously, and if we were in agreement with that and kind of what it looked like from our perspective at looking at the termination of 12/31/2024 versus June 1st, 2025. And then on top of that, if it made sense to terminate. So that's kind of just a quick overview of what we were asked to do. And if we want to just flip to the next slide. So taking a look at what we know currently, and I will say, we don't have a lot of data on the self-insured plan. So it's very, again, and you were a smaller size group for self-insurance, so it is highly sensitive. You obviously started last year in July, so there's what we call a run-in period, which means your folks are obviously incurring claims, right? Or they're having claims that are happening. They just haven't processed yet. So when it comes to self-insured plans, there's two ways to think of like how cash flow works. There's a paid basis, which is you had a claim, certain claims get processed, you pay on that month, you pay on that invoice. And there's what we call an incurred basis, which you may have not processed that claim yet, because it does take 5 to 6 months at times to actually see claims get processed and paid, but that claim happened. And so when you think from like an accounting standard, this is more like an accrual basis of accounting, we just call it incurred. So basically what we did is we took the information that we had, which is roughly 12 to 14 months of paid information, and then developed a incurred but not yet reported number, which would be you incurred the claim, just hasn't been processed. Medical processes differently than pharmacy. Pharmacy will process in 2 to 3 months typically for the most part, or at least 90+% of it will. Medical can actually take up to a year. And so you do have claims that got paid in June of this year that were actually incurred in July of last year. So it does take a while. I will tell you, based on what we're looking at, we're looking for this last plan year, or we're looking at this last plan year on an incurred basis, being a loss of close to 2.3 million. Again, that's purely all revenue coming in, premium revenue, any stop loss reimbursements for members that would have been above the stop loss level, any aggregate stop loss, which you have that as well, but that didn't trigger, and any kind of pharmacy rebate reimbursement. So being self-insured, you do get the rebates, but all that considered with the premiums, you're still projected to have close to a $2.3 million loss. Again, highly sensitive, but the one thing that I can say is there's a loss, and it's going to be somewhere close to $2 to $2.3 million. Looking forward, obviously we're in the plan year now, and this is really what's, I think, driving the conversation. Premiums didn't change. So from a projection standpoint, your costs are increasing. If premiums don't move to cover that increase, obviously, if you're losing 2.3 this year, you're probably going to lose more next year with cost increases, especially being where you are in a more remote area where competition isn't as strong as say like Metro Denver. Cost increases are going to drive, you're going to have more utilization. You're going to have what we consider more real utilization, which is again, that first month of the first year, the first maybe first month or two, July, August, are going to be artificially lower as people are just, as claims are getting processed and everything's getting up and running. So now we're looking at 12 months of real data, real claims, and at the same time, we have flat premiums. So unfortunately, looking forward, if you were to maintain this through June of next year, which would be a 12-month period, we're seeing somewhere close to $3.2 million of additional losses from the plan. So roughly in totality, 5.5 million for both plan years. And I will tell you, we did multiple different projections on this just because of how sensitive it is. And again, the size of your group. We could even push that loss up a little bit more. And that's not, I don't want to use it as a scare tactic. I just don't want to be realistic with you. So 3.2 could get higher, just depending upon what actually happens in the next 6 months. And so part of that too is what we call seasonality. And you all are teachers, right? We're talking about teachers here. And so in the summertime, we typically see school plans have higher utilization. So as you move through and you're coming through April, May, June, we would typically see more utilization from a school district than we would for a lot of plans that have more utilization closer to the end of the year. So you see there, we have like a $1.5 million loss as of 12/31 if you were to terminate, but that is just not 1.5 plus 1.5. You add in that seasonality factor and you get to 3.2 at the end of June of next year. If you want to go to the next slide. So all in all, obviously there's a consideration here to think about a move to CEBT, the trust that you were with previously. We do have rates for that, right? The rates are more, or premium rates, excuse me. The premiums are more than what you're paying now. Roughly about, if you were to make the switch in January 1st of 2025, you're going to pay roughly an additional 1.2 million in premium. But you're also going to transfer all your risk, all your exposure for those claims to CEBT. So I know the premium concept is more, but I will tell you, if we were to project you out this past year to just a break-even rate and said like, okay, let's just start this whole thing over. We're going back to July 1, 2024. We're going to increase premiums based on the projection. You would be a lot more than what you're getting from CEBT currently. So you would be, they're giving you like a close to 28% increase on your premiums currently. We're projecting what you really need based on your program today. If you were to maintain it, what you would really need was closer to a 50% increase on premiums to cover your cost from the self-insured basis through June 2025. So while you are paying more in premiums, if you move to CEBT, you're also transferring more in potential risk exposure to CEBT for those next 6 months. So that's what this is trying to model here. And I know it's a little high level, but we know this top line up here, the 2.3 million, that's what we're projecting. You've already lost. So that's happened. There's going to be some run out, but that's happened already. If you were to make the move to CEBT 1/1/2025, we're projecting you're going to lose roughly 1.5 million additional through December 31st. There will be some run out costs of roughly 550,000, which includes like just additional admin fees that you have to pay your vendors to continue to process claims. It also includes some coverage for stop loss, because I think given where we're at here, you're going to want some type of coverage to continue any claims that have incurred up to 12/31 but haven't been paid. So there's a factor in there for that. And then as you run down, you see the additional premiums of like $1.2 million that would be paid to CEBT. Now, if you didn't make this move and you just said, let's just let this thing run out to 630, the 2.3 million on that top line is the same, right? Happened. However, your projected loss increases to 3.2. Again, there's could be a lot of exposure in those next 6 months that it's hard to get the right number given the limited amount of data on there. But I will tell you, you are losing money on a monthly basis, it looks like, based on the information that we have. So that will continue. And again, the seasonality factor that we talked about for the warmer months of the year when school's out and people are getting things done, that plays a factor in there as well. You still have the same run out expenses from an administration standpoint. And then we did add some additional costs just from an operational standpoint if certain things had to be taken on by the staff. So there's a little bit of that there. And if we look at that, obviously, we're looking at a loss of roughly 6.2 million in totality. So making the move 1/1/25 versus 7/1/25, we're seeing, I would say, somewhere close to $600 plus thousand in savings if you were to make the move at the end of the year. And again, the large majority of that is the exposure that you have from your own risk group and like the claims that you have to pay, and moving that risk off to CEBT from what looks like favorable rates based on what we're seeing in your claims and how, if we were doing a projection, things would shape up for you with the information that we have. And then if you want to just flip to slide 5 real quick.
Sorry, no, it's not quite moving forward. There we go. Okay.
So yeah, I think, so kind of next steps, I'm trying to, obviously we're talking about this now, the termination, what's the appropriate path forward? Given kind of what we're seeing in the run rate of just your cash flow, and then thinking of also kind of the additional exposure. I mean, it seems like the 1231 provides some savings overall. You get some protection by moving to CEBT at what appears to be a favorable rate. So that's the consideration there. Terminate in December versus terminating in June. Stop loss coverage, obviously, once you make the determination of termination, there's going to have to be a conversation with the stop loss carrier to get that tail end run out coverage that we were talking about earlier for claims that have been incurred but not yet paid. We'll have to go, or the district will have to go through vendor termination. There's obviously legal considerations that we've been talking about as well. And then ultimately there is the transition to CEBT, which will take effort, right? And then ultimately, our suggestion or recommendation would be whenever you do decide to terminate, that the month before you start looking at an IBNR, a more up-to-date IBNR. So I could do an IBNR today compared to an IBNR 4 weeks ago, and it may be different just based on your utilization and the processing payments or the processing timing of your administrator. So if you do one closer to when your termination is going to happen, it'll give you a more accurate picture of what you're going to be responsible for that run out period from a claims perspective. And then I think once you do that, it would be getting regular reports from the run out administrator just to see what the actual lag is, and then determine what your future responsibilities would be 2, 3, 4 months down the road. So kind of like an updated IBNR projection, just to keep on top of what you all may owe. And I think with that was the deck.
That was great, Noel. Thank you. I think we'll move, let's move into questions.
Yep.
It's great. And please direct those to Noel, to any of us. Yeah.
Thank you, Noel. Director Titler, we'll start with you.
The first question I have from moving over to CEBT, have we gotten any indication yet from CEBT what 25-26 rate increase might look like?
Oh, excuse me. Yes, we have. It would look somewhere in the area of 10% rate increase. And they also added into the quote additional options that could significantly mitigate that if we moved to a little bit higher deductible. that might still be reasonable to employees. So that's something that the IBB will definitely need to talk about and striking that balance correctly.
Great, thank you. I also have a question on the resolution. On line 1 of where the numbered line is on the resolution, where it says may include but not limited to adopting rules and or amendments governing the termination of the self-insurance plan, including claim deadlines for payment of benefits. With that payment of benefits part, can I get some clarity on what that means, and would that have any impact on our employees trying to get the benefits and then not being able to receive the benefits?
Great question. Noel, can I kick that one to you? I mean, I can try to answer it, but I think you'd probably do it right the first time.
Yeah, for sure. So the payment of benefits is where the plan is saying it's going to be responsible for paying benefits, right? So when a member goes, so I'm going to put this in 2 scenarios. When a member goes in network to a provider, that provider is going to submit the claim on behalf of that member, right? And once that claim is submitted, then it is in the process of being paid or being reviewed or anything of that nature. So if you go in network, and that's going to happen pretty fast because there are typically contracts have certain deadlines, and when providers have to submit claims, there may be a pending claim or a denied claim that needs additional information, but it's already in the system, and so it's being processed. So if that happened the day before, it said like it was 12 months, if it happened the day before, then that's already in the system and will ultimately be paid and be responsible. Now, if a member has a claim that they went out of network and they never submitted that claim, then the plan at that point, after whatever the period is exhausted, is not required to pay that claim if the member did not submit it in a timely fashion.
So my understanding here is then, as long as the member was not in district, in network, then they would be okay and wouldn't be looking at losing any benefits.
Yeah.
That's the presumption. And that what we're talking about right now is if we move in this direction, that we would set us like a 6-month deadline for that. And we would do a lot of notification to employees that, hey, if you went out of network for some sort of medical procedure in November or December, we need to get those claims in before June, that you can't wait until October 2025 to submit for that. And we would make sure that all our providers were aware that we set a deadline of June 30th for any submission of claims.
So those claims are June 30th, even though we're switching over December 31st?
Because it takes so long to process the claims. So that's that like run out where we
That's
still.
$550,000 run out.
You got it. That we, you know, because yeah.
Incurred November, December, so within the plan.
Right. So that's actually part of the IBNR portion. So, and I will tell you, most providers will, I mean, that's how they get paid. So if they're an in-network provider, it's normally pretty quick. So it'd probably be, I would say the latest, probably be 3 months. A lot of the run out that happens in the further months out is like, you submitted a claim, it got denied, we're going through getting additional information, it might take another month or so before somebody submits information, it's reviewed, and then it's paid another month later. So, but I will tell you, most providers are pretty quick in submitting things from an in-network perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Director After.
Yeah, thanks for this. Thanks for the presentation. That was clear. I've seen this a couple of times now because of it was presented in Finance Committee. So thanks for the repeat info. I think this is heavy, I think, for us as a team, especially for you all. So I appreciate the professionalism you've brought to problem solving here. I do just have a couple clarifying questions. It was mentioned that there are some legal considerations. Can you just talk about the work you've done to try to ensure as much as you're able that if we make this transition on January 1st or December 31st, that we aren't going to be, hit with a bunch of lawsuits from the current plan?
Great question. Hey team, I'll try to tackle that, but y'all jump in if I miss anything. So we've also retained legal counsel focused beyond our general counsel that we have as a district, specifically to support with understanding and anticipating these sorts of changes. And so that team has actually put together an entire plan for us on kind of the step-by-step. They've analyzed our existing contracts, understood our termination agreements and kind of rules that we've agreed to through those contracts, and kind of developed for us a plan of how we would move through the next 70 days to untangle from those contracts appropriately and legally. And so that team is really guiding the kind of where we go after you all take a vote this evening. That'll move pretty quickly. And so they've been, because one of our questions was, of course, when we retained this additional legal counsel and began working with Siegel Group, was first, should we be doing this? And can we get some support with that decision? And two, can we do this? And understanding that. And then third was how and the technical components. And so we would actually be staying pretty darn tight with that legal counsel through this next process to make sure that we are mitigating any sort of legal risks with the contracts or missing something, an appropriate termination. Does that sound about right? Noel, anything to add on that?
No, I think you hit it right on. They've put together a lot of really good information on what needs to happen, and then it's the process of notification and termination, and then financially getting good with what you owe. And yeah.
Thanks. Another question is, in the information the communication you sent out last week to the staff members, you included quotes, I think, from RFCEA and classified staff saying that they they did not feel that they had 100% of clarity. They would like to make a strong recommendation. And I think part of that was because they didn't have clarity on the premium increases. And Christy, from what you just said, about 10% being the potential target for increases in 25, 26. Did they have that information when they put out those statements? But we still just don't know. And so they didn't want to make a recommendation.
I think what our employee representative leadership teams were really looking for was, what are our salaries going to be in 25, 26? Are we going to see raises? Are we going to see steps? And are we going to see the employee contribution to premiums at every level increase? And we just can't answer that right now, given the state forecast, given our district budget, given our student enrollment. We can anticipate that CEBT would increase 10%, but as Chief Chacoin said, we also have some options with CEBT on how we want to approach deductibles and copays that might give us different premiums. And so there's a lot of moving parts and pieces to be able to answer that question that we want to be able to answer, that would say employee premiums are going up exactly this much, and we anticipate either no raise or this % raise. But we're just not in a position to be able to articulate that and forecast that. And my sense, and I know that this was intended to come through in those statements, being in the room with a lot of those teams in discussion, is that the generally most employees also really understand why we can't forecast that. Yeah. And so, that was a big piece of like, we would like those numbers to be able to firmly state that we support the recommendation or don't. We also get that you can't give us that right now.
Okay. And then my last question is, given that, what did you also have discussion about what the consequence would be if we stayed with Think Health with the self-insurance program? But that's not necessarily like just a premium conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, as Noel articulated, certainly if we were appropriately addressing premiums to offset additional costs and not changing our plan in any way, that increase was, closer to that 50% increase. Yeah. And, those are some numbers that have been more appropriately refined through Noel's analysis that is just now really publicly getting out to our community. But we definitely shared that we have underestimated what this costs and that we would see costs go up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for all your work on this.
Treasurer Ramirez.
Can I ask the question? And I guess it's just to clarify, what was the initial estimate that we gave out?
The initial estimate was 5.775 million was the exact, and we said between 4 and 6 million. We were hopeful that maybe there was something out there that we weren't aware of, but it came up closer to the high end of the estimate.
Yeah, thank you. So like Director After mentioned, like we had this conversation during Finance Committee. And so I just wanted to ask the team some of the questions that we went through during that, because I think it is helpful to the bigger conversation of where we're at in this time and place. One of the questions that I want to make sure to ask is, what is the best case scenario for our team moving forward? What does that look like?
I can try.
Yeah, you took it in finance.
Okay.
Great job.
Best case scenario for our team moving forward is I think for our employees, just thinking about a really smooth transition, and I think Begonia is setting us up really well for that. And just looking at unraveling these contracts, which we have the best attorney to really help us with that, just because of her expertise in this area, and that those are unwound just perfectly. And I think we're set up to do that. So I think that that's going to work out okay. I think we've set ourselves up for success in those areas. I mean, and then the third thing is really the implementation of Superintendent Cole's phase 1, 2, and 3 of this plan. As phase 2 is then identifying where we're going to pay for these things from is the next phase. And then just continuing to garner communication and feedback on that to make sure that there's no surprises on that, but it's clearly, delineated about what those priorities are and what we could look to do to mitigate this problem.
Okay. And I concur with all of that. And I would just add, I think even from a high level, that I would say the best case scenario is that we are really assessing honestly what we can deliver in terms of managing health insurance as a small district, and that we then develop plans and can execute them effectively and responsibly. I would say additionally that we mitigate risk for our district. We talked about fund balance earlier, and that we don't have a huge fund balance. So we don't have a lot of wiggle room for risk right now. And especially with what's going on in the state in terms of school finance, this is not a good time for us to be moving into innovative, risky space with finances. And then I would say, I think the other best case scenario is that we work our way through the 24-25, well, frankly, 23-24 losses, 24-25 losses, that we find a way to stabilize our budget into 25-26. And importantly, do all of that ideally without significant impacts on our employees' take-home salaries. And importantly, do not change the quality of our students' lived experience and educational experiences in our schools, so that, and I know you brought this up earlier tonight, that whatever decisions we make are not impacting our students. And that we find a way through this to make sure that we are centering the services that we owe our kids and community, that we are supporting our staff and making sure they are happy and healthy and have access to health insurance. We know we have a lot of work today. We heard about this tonight, pushing livable wages. But best case scenario is that we can stabilize these components, prioritize the needs of our kids and our staff, and get back to focusing on our core work.
Awesome, thank you. A second part of that question, what is the team doing moving forward to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Great question. So, I really appreciate the work of our finance committee and helping really push this and help us better articulate. And so I would say there's a couple key things that we're going to be doing, and jump in, Chief Chicoine and Chief Platt, as we look at these. I'd say the one key there's three. One is strengthening our financial accounting practices. So finance committee is aware of some, and you all are aware of the work through the memos that Chief Chicoine is doing on strengthening financial reporting through quarterly financials and her approaches to that. Making sure that we're on track with budgets and that our projections are updated and accurate. Secondly, we want to really streamline our budgetary processes. I think in conversations that I've had with all of you that we've had, we want to ensure that everyone who is responsible for accountability on that budget can understand, access budgets, and that they're simplified as much as possible. And we want to make sure that we're adding, doing all that work to streamline our processes to make sure that the checks and balances that we're all accountable for are in place. And then third, I would say really has a lot to do with training for staff and all of our accountability partners. That's all of us in this room, so that we can really fulfill our roles and responsibilities in the budget development work. So I'd say those are the three chunks of work that we need to really commit to and have already. Miss anything?
So thank you. I did have a follow-up question and I was just reminded by it. The percentage we spoke about earlier. What is a healthy percentage for us to be at as a district?
Are you talking about the fund balance?
The fund balance, yes.
I think, just like the general terms of the 10 to 45% is pretty common of a district for a district of our size to fall in that range. And if we could move that up, closer to 20%, or in conjunction, look at our capital reserve fund balance, which is now budgeted at 0 for next year, just because there needs to be something somewhere that we can pull from in case we need to replace the roof or something. That isn't going to mean that we have to cut a lot on our general operations. So I think that's going to require a bit more conversation to get to that number for where we should be. But I think that those are the components that we should be looking at as we do that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Director DeFreitas?
So I appreciate the questions that Director Ramirez brought up. I just wanted to just because of the weight of the decision, and I haven't been at some of these conversations, I appreciate all of the steps moving forward. But can you give me a brief after action breakdown on what information we didn't have when this decision looked like a good one?
That's a great question. I would say there's a couple things. I think what we underestimated was and it sounds obvious now, self-insurance means we are managing the plan, not just implementing, executing, and helping people navigate a plan. Our internal teams were built to help folks navigate a plan, not to manage. And so I think that component we didn't have clear line of sight on when we moved to this plan. I would say additionally, the kinds of things that Noel spoke to tonight in terms of seasonality, in terms of accurately projecting and monitoring the flow of the plan, that is part of the management of self-insurance, is that you need to be tight on looking at a regular cadence of really interrogating your claims, looking at your revenue that you're pulling in. We certainly, I think, and we've talked a little bit about this I feel like when we looked at that budget and we looked at the health insurance fund and we looked at a column that said forecast for the 24-25 school year, in retrospect, I feel like all of our flags should have gone off and said forecast. That's interesting because now I'm seeing millions of dollars in the forecast column. How accurate are we on those forecasts? When were those forecasts made? I feel like that is a question that we should have been asking as folks approving that budget, and really should have interrogated when those forecasts were made, to what extent, because those were made early in the spring when we hadn't seen the delay of claims, the delay that most people that we talk to now would say, well, that's natural when you switch plans. People aren't going to go get all their care right away. It's going to take a couple months for people to step up and make the switch and then start utilizing that plan. And so I think those are some of the things that I think we failed to really fully see comprehensively about self-insurance.
But the organization that proposed this and supported our adoption of it has done it, I'm assuming, for a while, like that's their business model, their job.
I don't know enough about their history or how we found them or chose that group.
I guess what I'm wondering about is, has there been any discussion at looking into whether they were acting in good faith throughout this whole procedure?
And I don't know, Noel, if you want to speak to that. I think that's a question that our certainly I think has been in our conversations with Siegel Group, with the attorneys. And I don't know that there's been anything egregious, because I think, we don't actually have a contract with the kind of our broker. And so there weren't clear agreements or expectations. And I think a lot of what we've learned is like, yep, that was on you guys. That's a contract with you. So that is ultimately our responsibility to manage.
Yeah. And just a quick clarification. I appreciate the ownership and the leadership and the forward-thinking steps that you guys have taken. I 100% believe that that's the right way to go. I do just want to recognize for the public, though, Dr. Cole, you were not in a leadership position to make this decision at that time, correct?
Correct. But I would also name, I have been in this leadership position when we signed contracts for 24, 25, and I do believe I need to take ownership for that. And so I feel a great deal of responsibility to fix this as quickly and cleanly as possible and limit risk, losses, and frankly, time for this district that we've spent on this. Thank you.
I recognize and appreciate that a great deal. One more question. Can you just discuss briefly how this is in conversation with the CBA or the collective bargaining agreement, and where I know you've been involved with the conversation around RFCEA. They've been very integral. When do those decisions, maybe I'll just leave it open. How is it in conversation with that?
Sure. I have to name for sure that like the leadership from RFCEA, our certified IBB, boy, the work this board has done with administration, and that we really pushed and created a formal classified IBB and classified admin IBB, has been incredibly foundational to us being able to move forward on these decision-making processes with like step by step with our employees, really leveraging representative leadership. So I have so much gratitude for the leaders on those IBB teams who have leaned in, asked great questions, pushed us to tell us where we were missing the mark on informing employees of information, and helped us really refine our communication processes internal with staff. So that has been remarkable, and I'm grateful for everybody that was part of the push to formalize those employee leadership teams in a moment like this. It's been essential to communication. Moving forward, when we move into phase 2 decision-making, that's really about ensuring that employee voice and input is part of the recommendations we will bring to the board about budgetary decisions related to covering these losses. And so we will be continuing to work with classified, certified, and admin IBB through that work. And I know that the board will be part of that team. And of course, the ultimate, we will bring as a leadership team recommendations to you on budgets. That'll be your call at the end, but we want you to make sure that that's informed. And then kind of phase 3 of decision-making is really how we make these decisions that Chief Chacoin alluded to. And that's work that we've done in the past with certified IBB, where we look at increasing premium rates. We look at what's possible in the budget, what we're anticipating in terms of if there are increases. And we talk with our RFCEA, with our certified IBB, and this year we'll get to do that with classified and admin, about what our priorities are when we're trying to navigate increased health insurance costs. Do we want to, what are the kind of plans that we want to make sure we offer? We've for a long time had a commitment to try to cover 100% of at least the employees' health benefits. That's been a big priority for us because of those conversations. So I think that's, that next step in how we move forward into 25, 26 will have an incredible amount of consultation and collaboration with employee leadership teams. So lots of work yet to come with those teams.
I just want to come back to just a little bit more push on, I won't go further because it's obviously a sensitive area, but the good faith question of where we were given this information that made it seem like this was a reasonable choice. I don't need you to answer that right now, but I'm just putting the push on out loud that that's something I would be interested in learning more about.
Thank you all for all the work that you've done on this. I feel like I still have so many questions because I haven't been involved in finance committee. And I don't know that I could get them all answered here tonight, quite honestly. I'm still really unclear after reading through everything on what the additional projected loss is. We're gonna save $600,000 by switching on January 1st.
Correct.
Okay. And then I wasn't part of the health insurance committee when this was switched to, and so I don't know the reasoning that you're talking about. I don't think anybody on the current board sat on that, but,
I have one comment.
oh, okay, but my understanding was that we projected significant cost increases for CEBT, which is part of the reason that we created that health insurance exploration committee at that time. And so my question is, I'm curious what those increases would have been anyway, what our additional losses would have been over the last 2 years anyway. And then it doesn't change where we are now, but I'm just curious to know, like, had we stuck with CBT, my understanding at that time when that decision-making process was going on, and again, it wasn't a part of it, and I wasn't involved in it, so I wasn't deep in it, but my understanding was that CBT was increasing so substantially that we felt like we had to look at other options. And so it does cause me, like, I have this like guttural feeling of like, we're gonna go back to that. Okay, so we're going up 1.3 million or whatever it is. It's right around there, right? For these 6 months of coverage. Our premium is gonna go down after those 6 months, because I thought that Noel said that that was an increase to cover the what we're losing here. So our premiums are gonna go up another 10% from there. And then continue to go up at least 10% every year. And this is like a long multi-part question, but I understand too that we're considering reopening the health insurance exploration committee to look at other options. And so my concern is we switch now for 6 months to CBT, we open up an exploration committee, we decide to go another route because it is better and they provide better plans for us. And it's not a self-insured option, but it's another traditional insured option. And then we're switching insurance on our employees a few times within a year. And that feels so messy. And I don't know that that's worth $600,000 in savings. And so that's something that I'm very curious about. And I don't know what the other options are in terms of.
I would
coverage.
qualify, but when we named exploring other options, they are within CEBT.
Okay.
So CEBT offers a number of plans that you can kind of work with that have different kind of pros and cons and cost points. So that's the only thing that we would be exploring is other CEBT options. Our recommendation and if we switch to CEBT, there's a commitment that we would stick with them. And I don't know the exact components, but it's at least, I think, 24 months.
Yeah, it's 2.5 years.
That we would be committing to CEBT. And you're right, that is why we left in the first place. And, our Aspen to Parachute school district neighbors are all working through CEBT. We've talked to them. They're all hearing from CEBT anywhere from 10 to 25% increases on premiums. I think that question pushes us into this broader world of, the cost of healthcare in this valley.
Yeah.
And I do think, and you saw from, classified IBB recommended that in 2 years we reopen and look again. And, as we've been very public about this work with our community, we've had a lot of community partners reach out and say, hey, we've got a great plan for you. We want to talk to you. And this does not feel like the right time for us to continue to try to be innovators or trailblazers in health insurance benefits, in particular for such a district of such small size with not a lot of cushion in our savings at a time when we're declining enrollments, when the state forecast doesn't look good. Like, this is not a space that we should be innovative in right now. And so we've been communicating that to community partners that are saying, hey, you should try this really interesting plan. We are among one of the highest health insurance or health care cost regions in this country. And I think we thought that we could maybe beat that, which is, I think, part of why we left CEBT.
Are there not other group healthcare options? Because I seem to remember that there were multiple options presented the last time that there was this committee. And so I guess that's my question. We're closing the door on that for 24 months. And we're going to be at the hands of CEBT and their rate increases. And there was a very strong sentiment at the time that we made this switch that we didn't want to be there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm concerned that we're doing this for 6 months and for a $600,000 savings. And again, without knowing what the increased cost would have been for CEBT anyway over the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And if ultimately it is a wash, because I believe it was around a $2 to $3 million projection per year that those costs were supposed to increase. So that's the $6 million, right? That we're over, I would think. And so I'm just concerned that we're cornering ourselves. And now we're going to be stuck with CBT without having, that we're panicking because of these cost projections. But I don't want us to stick ourselves in a position where we're subject to 25% rate increases for the next 2 years. And it's even more out of hand.
Two
So-
things, great questions. Two things that I would love for the team to address. And I wonder if Noel, you can speak to the 600,000 current losses, but also the risk that carries, that's a different, the self-insurance, the risk that carries versus a CEBT. And I don't know, Noel, if you have other thoughts on that, but let me pause. And then I think part two is, I guess I would love for Noel to speak to that 600,000 savings, because I think there's more than just that estimated savings in terms of risk. And then let's talk about your CEBT question. But Noel, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. So it kind of what you're looking at. So the 600,000 is based off of trying to estimate what we anticipate is going to happen based on what we saw last year, right? And I'm looking at your paid claims right now, and I will tell you that around this time, around the summertime, this past year, you went from something around $400,000 to $600,000 on a monthly basis to 900 plus, $1 million plus in certain months. So it is very early on, I mentioned that there's a lot of assumptions built in here, and unfortunately, I think what we're showing you now is what I would consider almost a best case scenario for you if it were to play out that way. We had other projections that had the loss even greater, to where the savings in between the two scenarios is almost double of what we're looking at right now at the 600,000. So you're looking at more of $1 million savings potentially with the transfer of risk. The CEBT rates were coming in a lot more favorable than what we say your self-insured rates should have been. Part of that is also the stop loss premium that you're paying. If you're not familiar with stop loss, typically those products, what we call a loss ratio, they look for somewhere between 20 to 30% profit off of your stop loss premium. And in a group of your size, you get rated even higher on stop loss because, again, you're a smaller group and they can't collect as much premium if a big shot claim would have come. So there's some other factors in here that are playing into it, that if you were to renew like the self-insured portion of it, we're looking at 53% increase in your premiums now just to meet, like if you'd have done that in July, just to meet what your projected expenses were going to be. It could be worse than that. And then on top of that you'd have to put another 8 to 10%, if not more, for the next year once you add trend in and you do your projection. So the $600,000, I'd say, is if the best case scenario played out and claims ran at a lower level of our projection range than is possible.
Thanks, Noel. And I would say to your other question, Director Kuhlenberg, and it's fair. And I will say, what are our other options? And we did reach out to some other healthcare providers, and Chief Platt can speak to that a little bit. None of them could pull together a plan for us as quickly, and none of them had quite as comparable rates. And I would say that is even more recently, I think 6 months ago, 6 to 12 months ago, Garfield RE2, almost same as our size, did a very big deep dive into health insurance. They put out, kind of an RFP for health plans. They looked at the broker that we work with and very seriously considered that. And all of the estimates that they received from even other managed care plans, Blue Cross Blue Shield, those were far higher than what CEBT could offer. And they ultimately made that decision. So not that we couldn't do a very thorough process and find other options, but just knowing that they pretty recently went through that and didn't see anything better does make us feel like, we don't have, I think you're right. Like, we're not in a position right now where we have a lot of options. I do think what we're trying to move towards is stability and consistency and minimize risk. Potentially, is there something cheaper out there? Maybe. I don't think we have the time. And I don't know that we have the capacity right now to do that big of a robust deep dive. Do I think in 2 years we're going to need to? Yep, probably. And just look more carefully again at what's happening. I also think that in our decision-making, we probably have more opportunity to talk to CEBT and work with them. I'm very interested in what our Aspen to Parachute school districts can do collectively, working together on this as a broader region. And so those are all kind of, I think, lingering questions. I think there's also a component that I think that we, as, you know, the second largest employer, at least in our service area, could do more to show up in terms of advocacy and outreach in that larger healthcare cost conversation in the coming years. So I don't disagree with you that we're not going to have a ton of options over the next 30 months. Our priorities right now are to mitigate the risk.
Do you have an answer on what the increased costs of CBT would have been over the last 2 years?
We asked, did we get anything back yet?
No.
Okay.
We'll have that.
So I'm just from memory drawing the 2 to 3 million annually.
I think that's really important that we know that, because this is looking like, okay, we lost $5.6 million as a district, but maybe we wouldn't have. I mean, if we look at what we would have paid, then I think that is a better lens to look at that through. And then I think the other side to that to look at is, because we saved that money that we would have given into raises in CEBT, that ended up going into salaries. And so I just think that's something that our staff needs to look at, because if we hadn't done self-insurance, we would have paid more for insurance. Salaries would have increased less. And so as we're looking at next year's salaries, and as we're looking at salaries, I think that needs to be kept as a perspective, that we are in a place right now with salaries that we wouldn't have been if we hadn't self-insured.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then just the,
Yeah, we can start the 5 minute. You can start the 5 minute. Yeah, thank you.
and then just to talk about the question about why did we get ourselves in this situation and how did that come? At least something that for me that allowed me to think, okay, this sounds like okay, is we had stop loss insurance. And the way that stop loss was presented to us is, if it goes over this amount, we have stop loss insurance to cover us. And it wasn't told that we were paying $750,000 for stop loss insurance that covers $1 million of losses. And it was never told. And maybe that's something that we should ask, but my understanding, or my being naive to it, was, oh, we have stop loss insurance, they can't go beyond that. And that was my understanding of how we were stop loss.
I just also, I think it's important to name that the district did messaging on this change. Like, this wasn't like, I mean, on the initial decision to start looking at Think Health. And so, you know, I think because we're on this board and there's so many things always going on, we have loss of memory sometimes because of the gaps of stuff that we do consistently. But you know, I would encourage my colleagues to look up Think Health and your drives, to see the press releases, to see the surveys, to see the documents, the IBB presentation, the all of the documents in our drive that include Think Health, so that you guys get a better picture of how we got to that decision that then led us to this moment. Because I think that, you know, to Director Tytler's point, like, there was a process of conversation, a lengthy 18-month process that included diverse groups and stakeholders. And I think that at the end of the day, again, like, this was adult error, because like this was something that just somehow, and whether it was with the transition or with the management accountability, God knows what.
The way it was presented by Think Health. I mean, I think it's a combination of a lot of things.
Oh, so many things. At this point in time, we are at this moment where I think, to Superintendent Cole's point, like, I think we as a board need to mitigate risk. And the reality is that at this point in time, CBT offers us a better option for the future of our district, because we are going to feel this for years. I mean, I don't want to be dark, but we are going to feel this. Like, the reality of budgeting for schools in the state doesn't look great. And on top of that, we as a district, I think, need to be very aware of what our budgeting looks like right now too. This is like one of, I would add this to like a third problem and the problems of things we're dealing with. So, you know, I hear your concerns, Director Kuhlenberg. I hear the team's concerns. I think this is an unfortunate position to be put in as a board, as a district, as a staff. Like, it is, all of it is unfortunate. And I think at the end of the day, as the board, we have a decision to make to try to preserve and keep the district intact as much as possible. So I just wanted to make sure I shared that sentiment.
I know that in finance committee, you guys got into it further. I'm not understanding how this has such a massive long-term impact on us. I understand the increase. I understand the loss over the last couple of years. I understand the savings that we see in the next 6 months. But I'm not fully grasping how this impacts us 5-10 years from now.
I think the devil's in the details of where our runouts land, what the final numbers are in terms of losses. I think the extent to which we are able to cover these costs in our 24-25 budget. You know, I think we worry, I think Chief Chacoin and I run these scenarios of like, okay, if we have to pull funding out of our reserves and then we have to pay it back and we have flat income from the state, are we having to then, like, how do we rebuild back that fund balance? How do we ensure that we're continuing, you know, ideally to keep our employees matching inflation with salaries? So I think I hear you 100%, Director Kuhlenberg, that like, if we can address the costs, we know that health insurance moves every year. We build for it. We plan, you know, hopefully this is like a little derail and we get back on track. And then we, in my bigger world, that we actually step up a little bit more regionally on advocating and showing up at these tables, trying to work on regional health care cost conversations. And I think we need to be at those tables in ways we haven't been. So I think there's, you know, I'm hopeful that we can get through this and shake it off. And, you know, maybe we, as you're mentioning, Director Teitler, like, are able to understand that, like, hey, if we had CEBT, we would have jumped here in 23, 24, we would have jumped here in 24, 25, which would have naturally put us right here in 25, 26. We're gonna get back on track. Maybe we're flat. I mean, I would love to be just flat on salaries. Moving into next year, I think we're just worried about all the things. But I hear you, like, is this one issue gonna have a 5-year impact? I'm not sure, but compounded with the state forecast, with declining enrollments, I think that's where we start to feel like, oh, this is gonna be hard work for a long time.
Can I just jump in? I think, tell me if this is right. First of all, it's not just 600,000, because that's, if you look at slide 4, the 600,000 is the difference in changing today versus changing in 6 months. So there's not really a question of staying with Think Health long-term, because I think this gets to what you're asking. The projections were wrong. Like, the projections that we based and approved budgets on were just low for the cost of health coverage for our employees over the last, in future years. And so I think that's the big rub, is that it's not just comparing these two plans. It's that if we stuck with a self-insurance plan, it's just a lot more expensive than what was projected originally. Is that a fair assumption? And that's why, like,
over the last 2 years.
And going into the future. So that's why this is a large budget impact, well beyond 600K.
And I guess my other question is, from Noel's presentation, it was the $1.3 million in additional
Premiums.
Yeah, premiums for the next 6 months. And so that's in addition to what we would have been paying at Think Health. So that's an additional expenditure of 1.3 that we weren't prepared for over the next 6 months. But it's going to result in a $600,000 cost savings versus staying with Think Health plus the run out cost, which I understand. So
Can I add one thing? One of the impacts, I mean, one of the things that I'm an OCD planner, being, an accountant and that kind of thing. And as a part of that, I just am looking forward to the plan that after we get all of the information from different stakeholders and where people want to pull this $6 million number from, or 5.6 million, that we thought we had, and now we're, if we were to use all of that towards that fund balance, that 10% plus the 3%, it would put us pretty significantly below our fund balance. And so that's where I'm saying that that's pretty impactful, is that really can hurt, that hurts our general fund savings. And that really is what eats at our fiscal solvency. And so that's where I'm, kind of like, well, where are we going to get that money from? And I know we've got some ideas, and the staff has already communicated some thoughts, and, I know we're going to have a lot more conversation about that, but I think we'll feel a lot better when we see what those impacts are, trying to keep them away from K-12 and away from our employees and all of these other things, so that's part of that. And then the other part of that is if you take that $1.2 million, which is a half a year impact, and you multiply that by 2, that's 2.4 million. And then you take 10% on top of that, that's 2.7 million. Then when you look, and I'm spelling it out. I love using whiteboards, but I'm just talking right now. But when you look at a state forecast that says we're not getting any more money, so where does that come from? So that's like, it's just like the 2 hurricanes that kind of went through Florida a little bit, it's just like the one after the other, they pack kind of double punch potentially, but the other one was slower. So we could totally see that. And so I'm not saying this is any way, is like a dire situation, but it's just something that we're going to have to really pay attention to really navigate carefully to get through successfully.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, that helps, I think.
And Chief Secoin, to follow up to what you were just saying, so like if we looked at the health insurance fund for fiscal 24-25, and we have it as being that Think Health with all of that was going to be $9.4 million. If we're saying the $1.2 million twice, it's $2.4 million. And that puts us as $11.8 million. And if we're doing 10% on that puts us more like $13 million. Is that our expected amount that we're going to be paying in 25-26 to CEBT?
There's a much lower administrative cost for CEBT compared to Think Health. And so the numbers are about, I'm not going to say $1 million less, but I'm using pretty round numbers, but they're significantly less in the administration because we don't have to pay that stop loss anymore.
So when will we have a number? Because we're saying it's going to be 10% more. Do we have a number of what it's going to look like for 25-26 to cover ourselves through CEBT?
Now that we're looking at a premium-based plan, a managed care plan, it's going to depend on our number of employees. And then it's going to depend on how much employer contribution versus employee contribution, who's paying what percentage of family premiums and that kind of thing. So there are still some variables that we still need to review before we can get you that actual number.
Just moving forward. Just moving forward to clarify for the team, I think it's important to ask who moving forward is responsible from our team to ensure that 1, the transition is smooth and goes well, but 2, that there's accountability moving forward with this provider
With like CEBT.
Yeah.
I would say you're looking at the core crew right here.
Okay.
The transition to we have plans built that pretty much launch the minute y'all make a vote tonight that will kick off a series of communications and if we were to wait until the November 13th board meeting, we don't have an option to switch mid-year. Like if we move here, we go to open enrollment in like 2 weeks. So we have to move really fast. So the transition, I think really in terms of care, like getting employees shifted falls to Chief Platt. I would say the legal untangling has been this team working with Noel, working with our attorneys. And so we continue to do that to make sure that we've got enough ears in the room and that we're taking good notes and that we're clear on process. I would say moving forward in terms of accountability around health insurance, around contracts. You know, we as a senior leadership team have really been really looking at our processes on those and trying to figure out how do we build more, you know, kind of the checks and balances that I spoke to in those kind of three big buckets of work that we're going to be really leaning into to make sure this happens again. But I would still say that the ultimate accountability falls to your superintendent. And so that falls to me to make sure that we are managing these components and operating these sorts of plans transparently and reasonably and kind of with financial I want to say responsibility.
Are the $100,000 of run out operational costs, does that encompass all the professional service fees associated with this change?
What we're estimating there is trying to name that the internal capacity to effectively manage this self-insurance plan, we do not currently have. And we feel as a leadership team that if we were to decide to wait to move, that we have to bake in more FTE to manage this.
But that doesn't include the outside contracted professional.
It does. What
services.
we're estimating is about a half of a year of an FTE that would support an HR and manage this with 25. This is kind of in the fine print at the bottom of that slide with $25,000 for consultancy. One of the things that we've learned in talking to groups, this is another component of what we didn't see when we've talked to groups that do self-insurance, even nearby hospitals who have self-insurance and actually understand more in depth the healthcare cost world, they have third-party consultants that provide oversight and consultation kind of in the way Siegel Group has done for us, outside their broker, outside their organization. And so we really feel uncomfortable moving a day. I mean, we're glad that we have Siegel Group and that we have legal support through this transition, but we don't feel comfortable sticking around with self-insurance beyond January 1st without that allocation of funding, without that FTE internally to frankly do our due diligence in managing this.
I mean, I'm in support of this resolution. I'll vote for it, yes, in a minute, but I have to say, like, this time of year, especially I manage my mental health around elections by narrowing my awareness to my scope of influence. Like, if I can't change it, I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about it. But this is really difficult because the reality of what we're facing with health insurance costs in rural communities and the needs of our school and teachers and families is such a broken system. And the options that we have in front of us, I mean, I think it's the questions and the frustrations from the board tonight are as much directed at that as you know, the difficulties of our situation. And I just have to agree with you that I joined the board to have a larger scope of influence to try to serve. And it feels like there's this brick wall built around making schools financially viable and supporting our educators in the way that we want to and being there for our students. And I have to say that it's hard to be here and look at this.
Agreed. We've definitely had moments where, and we try to not go down the rabbit hole as a senior leadership team of feeling like, what kind of a system is this that our rural school districts are stuck making these decisions and without a ton of guidance or support from the state when we are cognizant of small teams. And I don't want to put you on the spot right away, Noel, but hearing this conversation, I would name that we have certainly found it to be incredibly helpful to have a lens broader. I mean, we talked about this on other issues during our work session, but how helpful it is to have someone outside our valley, outside of our region looking in and saying, this is the broader context and here's another line of sight. So I don't know, Noel, if you have any last words hearing Director DeFreitas' concerns or other like final thoughts that you have just about this decision, the context. I don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a service that everybody needs, and unfortunately, the service is really expensive. And then it's like the one thing that just continues to increase, and everybody's just like, oh, it's just going up. And I often say that like part of what I do is trying to help manage and in a situation that's always, it seems to be a bad situation. I don't think anybody's ever experienced healthcare premiums going down, right? Like that just doesn't really happen. We're lucky if we can maintain them flat. So I think in looking at everything that's kind of been put together and the conversations that I've had with the team is, you know, I think the transition out, and so I know there's been a lot of conversation about like what happens with CEBT next year. And I will tell you, based on the projections and the way that we're seeing the numbers, they would have to increase significantly to get to the next level of where we think you need to be if you were to continue a self-insured plan for another 12 months after, so like starting July 1, 2025. So, and I understand the concern, especially given everything that we've just talked about. But I think from a financial situation, it's just not a promising outlook. And again, your costs, in my opinion, are going to continue to increase, and we're going to see another spike at the tail end of this plan year, which would be the summer months, to where we would see claims continue to move. And stop loss insurance is protection, but again, it's a losing product. And what I mean by that is that you're going to continue to pay whatever the spread is that they want you to pay. And yes, you can market that, you can move it around, but sooner or later, you're never going to win on stop loss. You're always going to pay additional on stop loss, especially being a smaller group. So I think from my perspective and looking at the information that we have, obviously I'm not privy to, I'm not sure about what happened prior to, but just what we have here and that I've looked at, I think in talking to our teams internally, our actuaries and our analysts, I think the concern here is that the next 6 months could be worse than what we've been seeing currently. And the district could be at more risk and more exposure. And at this time, CEBT does seem to be providing favorable rates. And then they would have to increase to a significant amount, roughly, just high level numbers, 30% next year to meet what we would say your break even rate needs to be from a self-insured perspective based on what we have today.
And is that 10% that we're being quoted by CEBT for next year, like an estimate? Is it because are they saying it won't be more than that?
That my understanding is that it's going to be 10%. They've already provided the rates to us. Just given that we're only 6 months between the two renewals, that's what they decided to do.
So the rates that they're giving us is for January through the end of June.
And then we have rates from July forward for that 10%.
And we do have that.
We have those rates already?
I'm sorry?
We have the rates for 25, 26?
Yes,
Can you say what those are?
10% higher for each one of the plans.
And so what is the plan for January?
I'm sorry.
It seems like we should be able to have a number then for what it will be
Or
for
what the cost will be for next year?
for 25, 26. If we're saying we have it for January and it'll be 10% higher, should we not have a rate that says it will be this much?
At least a pretty close estimate based on the number of employees that we have.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't come with that information and I was looking from an employer and an employee perspective. I can definitely provide that to you.
I was just confused because when we talked earlier, it was said that we didn't have that information and we couldn't provide that to like the certified employee
I think
groups.
they said it was available, but it hadn't been, when those questions were being asked, it wasn't there yet because they just got it.
Well, and what the plan costs, we don't pass 100% of those costs to employees. We negotiate that. And so that's the piece that, when our teams are asking, like, what is the cost to us? Right. That's why we're saying, we don't know, because we don't know we don't know if we're going to pass on 100% of those costs to employees. We've not done that in the past. And, I think we recognizing that already there's an increase to premiums, an additional 10%, like we're really cautious of naming that or the perception. I mean, even what we recognized in communicating the June or the January to June CEBT costs, the true cost, not the cost to employees, was extremely concerning to employees when they saw the true cost of the premium. And we weren't able to articulate yet, like what would be the employer share, what would they be responsible for, what's the over and above, what we cover. So because we don't have those, we have not shared those numbers yet. But, do we, if we had a true cost, but we'd have to bake in a lot of assumptions, but we could run that out.
Premiums are going up 10%. What's not known is the impact of that on the employee, the full impact. Right, which is a complicated mixture of salary considerations, et cetera. So,
And I think other things that have to be taken into consideration too.
But the reason I asked that, or why I want to know, is like in our new proposed, like with your handwritten annotation of what the budget was, it comes out that the budget then really should have been $12.3 million for the year. And if we're thinking that CEBT costs maybe are going to be $13 million, the $12.3
My
million
question is why we couldn't figure out the total budget.
maybe doesn't
Cost,
look
I just-
so bad. So that's where I'm just curious, like, do we have that number?
And yeah, not the costume, that's my question too, but I feel like we could talk about this for
Yeah.
another hour, and if you all are comfortable and
Can't be
ready
here
to
for
vote,
another
I
hour.
think that we can go either make a motion to intervene and adjust the resolution, or somebody needs to.
I'll make a motion to vote.
Before that, I would like one more.
Okay.
That I would like to see if we can get two different things. One would be, what is that cost of? Will be the 25-26 cost to the district. And if we pass some of that on to the staff, then that is passed on. We have that discussion, but what would that cost be? And then
Did-
secondly,
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Did you want that as far as an additional cost or total cost?
total cost for like
Total.
25-26.
Okay.
And then I'm curious to know, and again, I know you said you tried to get the numbers from what it would have been from the last 2 years. Is there anything stopping you from getting those numbers? Is the time just not been devoted to it? What would be needed to be able to get those costs?
CEBT just needs to get them to us.
And is that something we can ask of them?
We
to
already
say,
did.
You did it.
I think there's
I-
more.
I can make a quick comment if that's okay, just if that's allowed on that one comment about the 10%.
Yeah.
If the increase was 10% for the next plan year, and that's what the increase was, you would still be, just based on your current experience, roughly $1 million better going to CEBT. Because what you need to cover your full costs on your self-insured plan just this year, based on current enrollment, is roughly $13 million, like 12.8. And the CEBT premiums, which full risk transfer, is 10.8. So like if that would have happened, right, that's 12 months. You put 10% on that, you're still coming in around 12 million for CEBT. And if you fully funded what you were doing, I mean, you're looking at close to $1 million difference. And that's not with trend at all on your current rates. So they would still be a better position for the next 12 months.
So,
Thank you.
are there any intervening motions to amend the resolution? Can you please call the vote?
Wait,
Correct.
is there a second on that?
We already.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Couldn't remember.
Director Kuhlenberg,
Aye.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Tyler,
Aye.
Director After,
Aye.
Director Ramirez.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thanks, Noel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
The next business order is action on the district UIP. Do I have a motion to approve the district UIP?
I move that we approve the district UIP as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
Do any board members have any for an additional 2 minutes of discussion on this, or are we prepared to vote?
I'm prepared to vote.
Prepared to vote.
I'm prepared.
Thanks. I don't think you have to come up if you don't want to. Can you please call the vote?
But we'll miss you.
The superintendent report and work session.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Tyler,
Aye.
Director After,
Aye.
Director Ramirez,
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg.
Aye. Motion passes. The next business in order is action on a resolution of support for Pitkin County Ballot Question 1A. Do I have a motion to approve the resolution of support for Pitkin County Ballot Question 1A?
I make a motion. I move that the board approve the resolution of support for Pitkin County Ballot Question 1A as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
I have 2 minutes of discussion for each board member. If anyone has any comments before taking the vote. Director DeFreitas,
No comments.
Director Tyler.
I would just like to state that some might question why we are getting involved with Pitkin County. I would just like to add that Pitkin County does include our district in its far east reaches. And so that is an important part for us. And then also any housing that is available up valley that frees up housing down valley and has an impact on us there. And so I think to me is why I support this resolution and what might seem out of our jurisdiction.
Director After?
No comments.
Director Ramirez?
I would just echo Director Tytler, and I look forward to our continued collaboration and relationship with Pitkin County to ensure that we are creating housing, affordable housing for our entire district community.
I would just echo the same comments. I think that any relief to the housing crunch that our entire valley feels is welcome and has an impact. Are there any intervening motions to amend the resolution? Seeing none, can you please call the vote?
Director Tytler,
Aye.
Director After,
Aye.
Director Ramirez.
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg.
Aye.
Director DeFreitas.
Aye.
Motion passes. The next business in order is action on a resolution in opposition to Colorado Amendment 80. Do I have a motion to approve the resolution in opposition to Colorado Amendment 80?
I move that we approve the motion, approve the resolution to opposition to Colorado Amendment 80.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll have 2 minutes. If anyone has comments, we'll begin with Director After.
Just a few comments on the context here. I am glad to see this on the agenda. I think it's important for this board to state clearly that we are in support of Coloradans' ability to have school choice, which they already have, and also want to encourage the state of Colorado to continue to fund public education and not divert essential resources to private private vouchers. And so that is why I'm in support of this resolution in opposition to Colorado Amendment 80.
Thank you. Director Ramirez.
Thank you to our team for their work on this. Director After brought this forward, and I appreciate the work made to make sure that we were able to have a resolution in opposition to Colorado Amendment 80. I think it's important for us as a board to not only make sure that our voices are heard at the Capitol and with our legislators on issues like this, but I believe that on issues like funding our schools and all of the other things like healthcare that we are often tasked to problem solve, that we make commitments as board members to take a stance and to be vocal about the impact it has on a public school district like ours. So thank you to our leadership for their work on this.
Director DeFreitas.
Yep, some of the same things. Public education is a foundational component of our democracy and equitable funding. We have our doors open to all students within our district, and I believe that keeping funds in public education serves all community members. So I definitely support this resolution.
Director Tytler.
I would just confer with what everybody else has said.
Same for me.
Sorry, I did
Thank you.
forget one thing, which was
Yeah.
thanks to the RFCEA for their additional support of this resolution.
And also thank you, Director After, for bringing this forward, for the team for getting it put together and on our agenda. Are there any intervening motions to amend the resolution? Can you please call the vote?
Director After,
Aye.
Director Ramirez.
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg,
Aye.
Director DeFreitas, Director Tytler.
Aye.
We will now move on to our final agenda item, which is board updates and appreciations. Begin with Director Ramirez.
Board updates.
And appreciation.
Depreciations. Oh my goodness. I feel like I have to look at my calendar. What did I do this month?
You want me to come back to you?
Yes, please.
Okay. Director DeFreitas.
My appreciations are for the teachers who have put in the long hours for conferences this week, similar to where Dr. Cole started us this long ago meeting. I got to watch my 6th grader student-led conference from Glenwood Springs Middle School, and I can tell the work that went in on the teacher's side of that presentation because I know my son. And he was clearly able to articulate what his goals were in each class, as well as show a just impressive level of self-reflection that I don't know ever shows up at home, but I'm glad it's showing up in the classroom on where he needed to go next. And that's a really difficult thing to get him to do. And so I just have to show appreciation both to his individual teacher, Ms. Alsop, who got him ready for that, and then also just the structures that they have in place there at the middle school that support the student ownership of their learning at that level. So.
Dr. Tyler?
I would just like to thank Roaring Fork High School for having us there for a board visit, and to Principal Henschel and Adams for having a nice presentation for us, and for the teachers that we visited. Were very impressive with the engagement that the children were showing in the students were showing in their classrooms. So just a shout out to Roaring Fork High School. And I would just like to echo Director DeFreitas. Thank you to teachers at this time. It's a super hard time for teachers in the year, super long hours, schedules that are different. And so thank you for the effort that goes in there at the schools, and we'll enjoy a well-deserved Friday.
Dr. After?
So as far as updates, we had the calendar committee meeting this past week and reviewed survey results from the 1,000 or so folks who responded to the survey. And there's some energy. I felt some really positive energy around some interesting changes. So we have another meeting between now and the next board meeting, and we'll be bringing, I can't remember the exact schedule. We'll bring things to the board to vote on. And then just wanted to share appreciation for Director DeFreitas for, she's the one who actually wrote the resolution that we just approved. So thank you.
Yes. Director Ramirez?
I guess I'll echo the thanks to Director DeFreitas. So, I mean, I already mentioned Policy Committee, Finance Committee, that we had a meeting. Thank you to our team for their work on that lift. I know it was a lot. I did get to visit Glenwood Springs High School. Thank you to the team for making sure that we were able to walk through the high school. It's always a gift to be able to see the students engaged, and also to be able to see the structure of the team. I know that tonight they had their Latino Parent Night, so really sad to miss it, but I was glad to see that invitation go out. I think it's important. So, we did pass a resolution asking our schools to get aligned with that, and I appreciated seeing that commitment. URA meeting, our famous URA meeting was set to be tomorrow. It looks like it's going to be rescheduled, so who knows when I'll come back on my agenda. And then I just want to give a huge thank you to teachers, staff. I know that we're in that weird space right before we hit Halloween, get ready for Thanksgiving, go into Christmas, and everyone's anxious. And I think that parent conferences obviously add a little bit of that anxiety of we're so close, we're so close. But thank you to our staff, everyone in the building, our lunch ladies, our paras, our secretaries, everyone who helps our buildings run. I think that our school district has gone through a lot in the last couple of years, and it's always a gift to know that we have an amazing team that keeps us going and moving forward. So thank you to this team for all their work on all of the things that you guys do. I really appreciate working with professionals. So thank you.
I have finished my 2-year term on the Legislative Review Committee. If anyone would like to step in on that through CASB, it really is only a commitment through legislative session. For the most part, Fridays, an hour meeting once a week. But with all the talk about state legislation and the pushes to support initiatives at the state level, it is a great opportunity to get involved. So if anybody wants to step in and continue to represent our rural school district, I'm happy to hand that baton over to someone else. In terms of appreciations, I wanted to give a thanks. You guys have all said it to all of our teachers doing conferences, but to specifically shout out the Basalt Elementary School staff, where the teachers have opted again to do double conferences. So both the English language teacher and the Spanish language teacher for each classroom, which is 2 classrooms, are at every single conference. So they're doing double the conferences this fall so that they can be present for every child and every family. And it is a huge ask of them. And they have stepped up and done it for the past few years because they know the impact that it has for the families and the students and with building relationships and community and support around the dual language model. So wanted to give them a specific thanks. And then also a thanks for Principal Hozak and Assistant Principal Santos at Basalt Middle School for an excellent visit last week. It was very well planned, prepared, executed. Got to see a whole cross section of the middle school, and it was wonderful. So I really appreciated the time, energy, and effort they put into that. And the thanks to this team on the health insurance issue specifically, and for everyone that's contributed and been involved in that. I know it's been a massive lift, and it's one of those things that you don't expect to be a massive lift for the whole first quarter of the year, but it was, and you guys have handled it very, very well. And so I can't thank you enough for that, for all the work that's been done there. All right, if there's no further business and no objection, this meeting will be adjourned. It is 9:14 p.m.